A very good morning to the August audience today. On behalf of Amity School of Communication, Amity University, Gurgaon, I welcome you all to the one-day symposium on current trends in media and communication studies research. Today we have with us a distinguished panel of experts, Professor Ruchi K Jaggi, Director, Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication, Pune, Dr. Vikas Dogra, Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication, Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla, and Professor Divya Sharma from Western Connecticut State University, USA. Thank you for acceding to our request to deliver talks covering various aspects of media and communication research. A very warm welcome to you. I would also like to welcome Professor UN Singh, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and Chair Professor, Amity Center for Linguistic Studies, Amity University, Gurgaon. Sir, as always, we are thankful to you for your continuous encouragement and support in all our intellectual endeavors. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Professor Manish Verma, Director and Head of Institution, Amity School of Communication, and Ms. Isha Janati, Deputy Director, ASCO. I extend a very warm welcome to you, sir and ma'am. Also, a very hearty welcome to all the media educators, research scholars, and students who have joined us today for the deliberations. I'm happy to share we have participants joining in from all over the country, and on behalf of Amity School of Communication, Amity University, Gurgaon, I welcome each one of you with the confidence that your active participation in today's deliberations will create more synergy for each one of us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I would invite Dr. Manish Verma, Director and Head of Institution, Amity School of Communication, to formally welcome the guests. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja. Respected Professor UN Singh, Dean Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Dr. Ruchi, Dr. Vikas, Dr. Divya, all the faculty members, scholars, and students. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all today in this event. The field of media and communication studies and research in India has evolved mostly in last decade of 20th century, unlike many other areas in pure sciences or even arts and social sciences. Most of our universities, especially the government universities, started their PhD programs in mass communication in late 90s. Even our own university, which is Punjab University, where we studied, I did my master's as all other speakers on the panel today, and which has one of the oldest journalism schools in India, did not have a PhD program in mass communication till 2003 or 2004. So as a result, most of the early researchers in this domain came from interdisciplinary areas, mostly from arts and social sciences. If you look at most of the early researchers and PhDs in our area, you'll find that they have covered very generic and basic issues. Hence, the research in India, especially in media research, could not go deep into the core issues like media audiences, media representation, media language, or media institutions. Early in my career as well, when I joined academics, I was looking for the opportunities to publish and attend good conferences in media studies in India. And to my surprise, there were very few opportunities to attend such conferences or even publish good papers. In 2011, at Amity University, Jaipur, with the help of my colleagues in Amity and outside Amity, we organized India's first international conference in media studies, and we got an overwhelming response. Participants from all over India and the world attended this 3-day event. And we also started a journal in media and communication studies the same year. And by this, we provided an opportunity to early researchers, scholars to publish their work and collaborate. I remember at that time also, Dr. Ruchi, Vikas, all of them helped me a lot in these initiatives. It was very satisfying at that point to see that we were able to initiate something which could motivate a lot of people to follow us. So thereafter, a lot of universities, institutions started organizing conferences, and started their own journals as well. It's been 10 years now. There is a lot of progress. There is a progress, but still we have a long way to go in media and communication research. If you look at the quality of journals and publication in India, we have only 2 journals from India who are there in Scopus, including one from our own Amity School. With all the universities now focusing on research, and even the media researchers are asked to publish in high quality journals, and even the UGC has streamlined its process of categorization of quality publication through a list of journals, it's imperative that we understand the scope of research in media and communication studies and educate young researchers on how to publish and what to publish and where to publish. As a student, scholar, and faculty of media studies, it is our duty to contribute to the domain, and I don't think there can be a better way to contribute than to educate young researchers and help them understand the scope of media research. As media has evolved over the centuries, from print to radio to digital, to television to digital now, it provides us, it presents us a lot of opportunities to study various aspects of media, representation, language, audiences. So that was the whole idea behind this, organizing this event. So we are bringing a panel of diverse speakers who are very best in their domains and areas to share their experiences, their research journeys, and educate young scholars or early researchers on the scope and current trends in media and communication research. I'm sure it's going to be a very informative session, not only for the researchers, but for many faculty members as well. I must share that though we belong to different institutions, organizations, but there is a camaraderie, there is a fraternity which exists, and this is one of the initiatives that we have done, but we will continue to bring good people who are experts in their area to promote different aspects of media and communication studies, be it research or academics, and we should always collaborate and contribute to the body of knowledge in the media and communication studies. I once again, on behalf of Amity University, Haryana, welcomes my colleagues and friends, Dr. Ruchi, Dr. Vikas, and Dr. Divya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Verma. We have with us Professor UN Singh, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and Chair Professor, Amity Center of Linguistic Studies, Amity University, Gurgaon. A linguist, creative writer, translation theoretician, lexicographer, and a keen researcher in cultural studies, Professor Singh has held several administrative and academic positions in institutions of repute spread all over India. He is a Sahitya Academy awardee and has been instrumental in planning for major research projects like the National Translation Mission and Linguistic Data Consortium for Indian Languages. Sir has recently been appointed as the chair of the UGC's new Center for Endangered Languages in Vishwa Bharati, and his task includes acting as the national coordinator of the project spread over 9 central universities. I would now invite Professor UN Singh to give his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja, and thank you, Manish, for calling me. I'm an outsider, insider both. Unlike Ruchi ji, Vikas ji, and Divya ji, I'm not really teaching communication, but I'm into communication from a different angle altogether, because I have written screenplays, stories for the serials, my own stories, which have been aired in Doordarshan. I've written songs for the video songs, and I've been creative in a different way. About 500 films that I produced, documentaries, with 140 directors all over India, and we had distinction of Sriram Lagu, Amol Palekar, Gautam Ghosh, everybody actually even acting as anchors, Somitoda acting as anchors. So in a way, my role is very different. It's a creative role. I'm not really studied communication. Of course, there have been PhD students with me who have worked on communication studies from different universities. And I've learned so much from them, more than they have learned from me. This is absolutely right, as Dr. Manish Verma has pointed out, that the publication avenues are not really widely open for those young researchers who are right now engaged in different kinds of research activities vis-a-vis communication. When you try and bring in a relationship between communication and language, the linguists tell you, no, this is not where you should publish. So, no, you think of some other place. When you want to connect intersemiotic translation, that is translating stories, fictions into films, then the translation theoreticians would jump up and say, no, but this is not translation studies, so don't publish in our journal, not in our conference. So this is a problem with media studies, that sociologists, anthropologists, economists, linguists, translation people, everybody is saying not here, somewhere else. So this is something which we have to learn how to get over this and get crash. This is very important. The other interesting thing that I notice absent in Dr. Manish's introduction is that there's a creativity aspect of communication studies. That communication is in a way twice removed. Quite often, what we are saying on the screen is something which we have thought about, we've written about, we have ruminated, we have firmed up, and then we are twice removed from there as we are making the production happen. This is where a lot of creativity comes in. These days, particularly if you look at the YouTuber and millennial travelers and the blogs that they create on communication platforms, they do come up with very interesting, depictions which are not predicted by them. They don't know as they get off the bus somewhere in Yokohama or in Kobe, they don't know what's going to happen, what's waiting for them. And they take it as they appear. So that creatively how you handle this. A lot of films on foodie, for instance. There are foodies now going around the world, tasting food in different places, street food as well as restaurant food, and engaging in conversation of how things happen. And if you look at their camera work and look at their production, it's a great thing. And today, even with simple iPhone, you're actually doing a lot of good shooting. You don't have to have a very sophisticated camera hanging around with that and have an extra person going around with you. No, you can be alone and you can make wonderful films. So that's a challenge. And how do those things happen? There is need to study that as well. The changes that are happening from creative angle, that is from the angle where you are twice removed, you are very measured, you have a screenplay, you have a text, and then you are going from one text to the other on the screen. Whereas when you are not going from a text to a text, we are straightly entering into a text, entering into a scene in a society, and then acting the acting in a certain way. How do these things differ? And what are those possibilities? I think something like this is very important. Actually, those of us who are into writing screenplays know that there are many, many theories rough working theories with which they begin. And one of them is that life is full of tension, and all you need to do is think of a few more tensions which you can add on to the screen, so that that is something which is very important, that you can actually add on to those tensions. The other thing is like those of you who have watched people like Kumar Bishwas, from nowhere he'll create laughters. So he will create a relationship between Banaras and Hathras in terms of the word Ras. And then that will be something which will be beaming to millions of people, everybody laughing in their own drawing rooms or in their bedrooms, watching those videos of purely poetry conference. It's a Hasya Kavi Sammelan. It is that which comes up on the media. So media today has a great penetration, thanks to also the penetration of television and film technology all merging and then all being available on a small platform like mobiles, and mobiles becoming smart enough to project that. So I'm sure a lot of this will come up in today's meeting, and I'm grateful that the Amity School of Communication has thought about a one-day event where they got the best people, and I'm sure students will be, and the researchers and other faculty members will be greatly elated hearing them, and I'm sure they will come up with many, many ideas which we will see translated into good papers eventually. I welcome all of you and thank you for listening to me very patiently.
Thank you, sir, for setting the ball rolling for intellectually enriching sessions for the day today. Before I invite Professor Ruchi K Jaggi for her talk, a small request to all the participants. Whatever questions you would want to ask our panelists and the experts for the day today, you can please put the questions in the chat box in the Q&A section, and we'll take up all the questions together once all the sessions are over. So Dr. Ruchi K Jaggi is a professor and director of Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication. She is also the Dean of the Faculty of Media and Communication, Symbiosis International University. Dr. Jaggi has a professional experience spanning 2 decades and has been in higher education for over 16 years now. Her research interests include media representations, children and media, popular culture analysis, media and children, television studies, journalism studies, media literacy, streaming platforms, and emerging discourses of identity on new media. Her research has been presented at national and international communication conferences and published in peer-reviewed international journals. She is also a recipient of a research grant for a project on interactive documentaries in partnership with Salisbury University, Maryland, US, under US-India 21st Century Knowledge Initiative Awards. Dr. Jaggi is also the Vice Chair of the Media Education Research Section of International Association of Media and Communication Research. She recently completed a global research study on media, children, and COVID-19, along with a team of 42 researchers from across 30 countries. She also has significant international experience, having traveled to different countries for academic conferences and projects, besides being the resource person on media studies for many international students. We are all looking forward to your talk, Dr. Ruchi. So over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja. Grateful for a kind introduction. Very good morning to all people who've joined us on this symposium. My sincere regards to Professor UN Singh for a very delightful introduction just before I had to speak, because a lot of focus that I have in my talk is so much on interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity in media studies, and therefore approaching research in media and communication from that perspective. Thank you to Dr. Manish Verma, the director of Amity School of Communication, and also a very, very dear friend and colleague, for creating this opportunity and symposium where we could all get together to discuss this. I also give my regards to both Professor Vikas Dogra and Dr. Divya Sharma, my co-panelists on this session, because I think I'm really looking forward to listening to both of them to be able to also in a lot of ways, what we present to you today possibly will be a narrative of the context of media and communication research, and possibly we are all different parts of that narrative, you know, how we set the plot today. And I hope this is just the beginning of this discussion, and a lot of us from different institutes in the country are able to carry forward this narrative to have this very significant discussion. Because, and I don't know, because I kind of, when Manish and I were talking about it, and sorry, when Dr. Manish and I spoke about it, and we were discussing, you know, this entire symposium, I looked at it as a lot of younger people, you know, a lot of younger people, younger faculty, PhD research scholars, who will be the audience for this. So my sincere apologies to very senior people, because I've really structured my talk to target that section of the audience. Because I kind of think that when I was a student doing my master's, I think I really was always academically oriented, but I never understood that I could immediately have a journey where I could, like Manish was just talking about, that how in our own alma mater, which is Punjab University, from where we did our master's in mass communication, there was a PhD program which started, you know, in mid 2000s, where all of us kind of, in that sense, are fossils, because we finished before we hit, you know, the 2000s in that sense. And we didn't really know. I mean, I wish like somebody could tell me that, Ruchi, you have it in you. You are so academically oriented. Why don't you look at like a career in academics? Because why in my generation was academics always something as a plan B that people had? Why was not like, I mean, because I see a lot of younger people today who are so motivated, and they understand that they have an academic journey really envisaged for them. And that was not the case with us, because I know that I used to sit with my classmates and teach them communication theories and research methods. And I was one of those rare people in a journalism mass communication class who kind of had a real passion for these courses. But I never had the guidance or even an opportunity to understand that I could actually get into research as a full-time profession if that drove me, if theoretical or methodological orientation was something that would help me have a career, a profession. You know, so I think that's been a kind of a little bit of something that I always feel that if I had it early in my life, I may have figured out, you know, my PhD journey or something in a very different way. And also, like Manish spoke about it, and I think that's so pertinent, the lack of opportunities that existed then and the kind of opportunities that exist now are totally different. So I really want to like focus on that part, but I also, like I said, I have a presentation and I'm going to kind of screen it now. But what I want to focus on is something very basic, that how do you even look at the idea of media and communication research? What are the possibilities? How do you approach it? And why should you stop thinking? And I'm so grateful that Dr. Singh actually spoke about, you know, this entire idea of what you see happening today, what you see happening around you are rich media texts to be explored. So you're walking into a text, like he so delightfully, like I'm so delighted to hear that poetic rendition in the way he spoke, that you're walking into a text. And I think I really want to focus on those aspects, that there are possibilities to research into very different kinds of areas today. And I am primarily a very, very textual and qualitative researcher. I have hardly used quantitative in my work. And despite that, I have had a good reception of my work. And I really want to focus on that part. And so let me start my presentation, and then I think we can discuss it like further. Give me 1 second. 1 second, huh? I'm going to share my screen now. I hope my screen is visible to everyone. If somebody can just give me a thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, to do the presentation mode.
Yeah,
It's perfect. Now perfect.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to give you an overview of this domain from my experience of the domain. Also try to start with a few conceptual notes on the subject, and then move on forward from there. So I don't know how you look at it, but I really want to talk about some basics out here. And I just want to I don't know how you look at research, like, and like, I think Dr. Manish was talking about it, you know, there is this kind of focus right now in universities for multiple reasons to focus on research, right? Publish papers, go to high quality journals and publish here. And he also spoke about how there is a dearth of some good journals in communication in particular that are coming out from India, right? And I don't know, sometimes we really need to get to basics to understand why do we research? You know, we primarily keep thinking about what is the topic that I should research on, what are the contemporary topics I should go to. So I think I just want to start with kind of going back to the basics and just understand the meaning of the word research, which is simply to discover, right? What do we do when we conduct any research? We try to discover something. And what do we try to discover through research? We try to discover possibly more knowledge, some answers, some responses, right, from a particular perspective, from a particular aspect, facet, or dimension. Sometimes when we conduct research, we also try to establish cause and effect relationships. When we investigate phenomena, the what, why, and how of phenomena, sometimes we just conduct research to discover a better response, a more contextual response, because a response may have been generated in a very different area to a question, right? And we try to kind of get a better response, a response which is more context specific to the kind of question we have. And a lot of times we conduct research to explain phenomena, sometimes to even predict and interpret questions, interpret situations. But what is this journey of discovery all about? This journey of discovery is always about contributing to the body of knowledge in a particular field, a field that we may belong to. And we sometimes may create knowledge which is purely theoretical. Sometimes we may create knowledge which is very, very practical. But the idea is that whatever I'm contributing to, whatever I'm discovering is going to make a difference, or it's going to inspire some kind of action. So that's the kind of idea with which, you know, very, very ideally, in a very utopian world, that's the entire meaning of research. The point is that there are so many ways to research. So then what is this huge, overwhelming focus on using methods and methodology? And I think that's a question that a lot of young scholars have it like many times, that why is it that we need like very, very, strong methodological approaches to approach questions? You know, why can't we have more fluid ways of looking at things? Well, even fluidity, the fluidity in thought also requires a certain cogency. It requires a certain coherence. And that is why it's important to understand what is, as a researcher, your own methodological dimension. What is your own methodological or theoretical orientation? And that is why identifying certain research methods for your work is very important. See, we can all process information, but sometimes it's very important to understand the process of evaluating information. And what is the difference between any kind of argument that you propose, which is a generic argument, vis-a-vis or comparing it to a critical argument? There is a significant difference, because when you have a critical argument in place, you have some cogent concepts which are combined to produce that argument. And for that, you need a process. And in research parlance, that process may be defined as a methodology that you approach it with. Also, research gives you an edge over being just intuitive. A lot of times we may just have intuitive judgments about situations, about questions. And methodology gives us an edge. It helps us to contextualize our research findings in a larger area, in a larger body of a subject. And also the entire rigor of the process makes our judgments very, very critical rather than intuitive. In addition to that, it is very important that we as academicians learn the importance of certain concepts. And these concepts are the importance of something called context. So you may have a research question, but that research question has to have a context. And when I come to examples, I'll talk a little bit more about it. But contextualizing your question is extremely important. There will always be a certain focus of your research question. That focus may be conceptual, theoretical, methodological, you know, even in some cases, it may be a very ideological or a political focus. But what is that? But that focus is extremely important. Then you need a structure that we call a framework that you need to work with. And that framework or that structure is something that will help you develop some sort of a critical insight, a sharp insight, and also in the process help you propose some nuanced arguments. And a lot of times we all misunderstand the term argument in research. Argument is not just a defense of what you are trying to do. Argument is that central statement or point around which you build your entire work. And I think a lot of us, especially a lot of us who are trained in Indian educational institutes, and nothing against this. Today I lead an educational institute, and possibly I may be committing a similar error somewhere because, but every day trying to work on it in some way or the other. But what I'm trying to say here is that we haven't been trained in the process of writing or thinking in a way where we construct or synthesize arguments. I think a lot of people from literature and hardcore humanities, and to some extent some social sciences, come with that training. In mass communication in particular, in media and communication, the focus has been so professional and vocational in nature that there has been an excessive focus on skill building, competency development. And in the process, while we learn how to write for audiences. And when we run, and nothing to I'm not trying to put down audiences, but when we write for a very targeted audience or a niche group where we want our work to be accepted and to get popular, because that's the kind of training most of us have, we also tend to sometimes oversimplify it. When we tend to oversimplify it, we sometimes ignore the nuanced arguments that it contains. And therefore, our entire process of writing is so much about, simplifying things. While sometimes an argument requires very complex concepts to be integrated to put forth some nuanced perspective on a particular area. A lot of you who are teachers in mass communication institutes, colleges, universities, departments, wherever, would also understand this in another way. We all make our students do some final dissertations now or final projects. So a lot of students might do practical work, but those of them who write a thesis, a lot of times the kind of questions we see them asking have got so much to do with what's happening in the industry, right? Because that's the kind of theoretical orientation that we develop over the, this time of pursuing this particular degree that's called mass communication. And even now, a large focus of mass communication education is the skill-centeredness of it, creating a professional framework for students. And that's not wrong, because a student might have that orientation. But those of us who are now in the domain of the academics of mass communication, which is also loosely sometimes just referred to as media studies, while there is a significant difference between the two. But media studies, we really need to understand that argument building is core to understanding the process of getting into research or writing a research paper or creating a research framework for ourselves. So that's the point I'll move from. Now, when I specifically focus on media and communication research, and I'd like to give you an overview of that, we have to understand that media and communication or mass communication is not in that sense an exclusive or a standalone discipline. There is a huge influence of social sciences and humanities, in particular social sciences and humanities, on this particular discipline. So it is like an interdiscipline, even sometimes something like a transdiscipline, because it's constantly changing. It is so dynamic as a discipline. So it is influenced by literature, sociology, political science, economics, psychology, history, anthropology, philosophy, law, business, and something that when Dr. Pooja introduced Dr. Singh to us, she spoke about his work in cultural studies, and culture studies is today significantly overlapping with media studies, and that is why there is this huge domain called media and culture studies that has emerged. So that means that if there is so much of humanities and social sciences that is influencing mass communication, or that has become the conceptual foundational basis of the development of mass communication as a domain, then that also means that there is so much of theoretical diversity that exists in mass communication as a domain. So there is, in that sense, a lot of theories from literature, from sociology, from pole science, from economics, psychology, history, philosophy, that influence the theoretical framework of mass communication research. And similarly, the methods from these particular disciplines from humanities and social sciences. And one of the speakers today is Dr. Divya Sharma, whose basic training is in sociology. And she's moved on to working significantly in one particular dimension of media, and she'll speak about it, and that will give you like a very, very practical example of how different disciplines kind of merge with media to create like a certain character of research. And therefore, because it is influenced by so many disciplines, it has similarly a lot of methodological diversity because there are so many domains influencing it. Now, I really want to focus on a very, very conceptual so let me say a concept, right, which talks about why, we research media the way we do. So now if you just look at this simple linear sort of words that I have just put together, on one side, very simply put, is the society. On the other side, very simply put, is people, right? So there is a constant interaction between people and society, right? And to kind of refine it further, society could be reconceptualized as a social structure, and people, because they exercise their will and also kind of exercise a lot of multiple communication layers, have some agency which is referred to as human agency. And now when the social structure and human agency interact with each other, they require a certain medium in between. They require certain connection, something that will create that interactivity, that will facilitate that interactivity. Now, what is this medium? This medium could be anything from speech to drama, dance, music, painting, to books, newspaper, radio, linear television, or films, or it could even be the new media technologies that are characterized by interactivity. So in mass communication, we replace this term medium with media. It's media, the media as we know it. This is what that media is. Now, if we go back to this particular illustration, the social structure and human agency interact with each other through so many mediums. And one of these mediums is specifically the media that we all belong to. The media that is the foundation of what we call media and communication or mass communication. So that's the kind of role media has in society. I take you to another reference to another scholar, and will like to now situate the media more theoretically for you. Now, if you look at, and a lot of you would have studied Habermas and his conceptualization of the public sphere. And there are so many arguments against calling media as the public sphere. I kind of have a huge difference of opinion on those arguments because I really look at media as the public sphere. And let me just argue my point as to why I would say media is public sphere. Now, if you look at it, again, there is something called the capitalist or the industrial sphere. Where all the production is happening, where the labor and production dynamics are happening. Yeah, and that's one part of the overall social economic structure that we are a part of. On the other side of it is where we all exist in our more intimate spaces, and that is the private sphere. It may comprise our families, our friends, our close acquaintances. And there is the socio-economic capitalistic industrial sphere, and there is this private sphere. And when both of them have to interact with each other, there are so many ways in which this interaction happens. So now this interaction may happen through a relationship which is facilitated by government or governances. It may have a relationship which is facilitated by religion. It may even have a relationship which is facilitated by financial institutions, sometimes like banks or something. But even in this particular, this oblong interactive sphere, where these interactions are happening, where governments, religions, institutions exist, one more institution that facilitates this interaction is the media. And therefore, the media is the public sphere, where the industry and the private sphere of people are also interacting with each other. And because it is the public sphere, and if anything qualifies as public sphere, it is expected to perform certain roles and responsibilities. And because it has a social role, a political role, a certain responsibility, then investigating it becomes extremely important. And then it is also critical to study how it interacts with the industrial or the capitalistic sphere and the intimate and the private sphere. And that means it is extremely important to study the relationships between media and the industry, media and people, who we call audiences, who we call consumers. But it is also very important to study media's relationship with other components of the same public sphere, which is media and so many institutions. And that is why we see a lot of studies on media and government, media and politics, media and religion, and a huge frame of media and culture that's emerging from it. So if you look at it, it is this interaction. This also shapes a lot of subjects of investigation in media research or mass communication research. Let me just take you to this particular illustration and also kind of talk about how research subjects in media and communication emerge. Now, if you look at it, at the center of everything, is content, which we very broadly in professional parlance called content. In a very academic way, content is substituted by the word text. So something that we have in middle is actually the media text. And examples of media text would be news, films, ads, and now everything is content. So I'm looking at content as a kind of media text. So media text is the center of this discussion. Now, media text is created, right, by content creators, producers, filmmakers, writers, journalists, advertisers, anyone, right? And today a lot of YouTubers create that kind of media texts and content. There are so many influencers on social media who are creating that content. Now if you think about that media text, then that means it is influenced by who it is created by. So there are issues of production and creation. Then on the other side, there are people like you and me who are called as audiences, who may be called as readers. And today, a lot of us are just called consumers because everything which is content is consumed. Imagine if the word is text, then the reception is that of a reader, right? If the content is film, then in a lot of ways, or images or visual, then we are called audiences, right? We are listening to it or we are watching it. And when it is called content, we automatically kind of become consumers. Look at the way the words change the position of what the media text is and what is the position of somebody who is receiving it. So there are, of course, issues of reception and perception that need to be investigated. Very important to understand in all of this is that all of this is happening in a certain context. So the media texts that are produced in a certain political context, in a certain cultural context. All of this is so important to understand that any question that we ask, why will it always not have a generalized or universalized conclusion? Because we are asking our question in a particular context. And also very important to understand that this context is also defined by the economics, politics, sociology, ideology, particularly the identity context, right? And all that influences issues of production and creation. And similarly, the same concepts like economics, politics, sociology, ideology, that I call identity here, also influence issues of reception and perception. So when we ask a media research question, or when we propose a problem in mass communication, we can never have a problem which is exclusive to the domain. We can never isolate or detach ourselves from multiple influences that impact media text or the process of creation of that media text or the process of reception. And there is so much in terms of society, politics, economics, ideology, and so many other things that impact that process. It is so organic in nature, and that is why all the media research is based in something that is called the convergence perspective. And when we raise a question or when we want to ask a question, it is very important to take cognizance of this convergence perspective. Let me try to just give you some examples of media research, which will help you understand, one, the convergence perspective, and also how so many other disciplines influence it. And these are just some examples, and there are many more. But if you let's look at journalism studies, and I'm not talking about the kind of research that's happened for years, but a lot of emerging areas. So today in journalism studies, there is so much of focus on studying technology and its influence on journalism. social media journalism, traditional news media, ethics, advocacy journalism. One huge domain emerging is algorithms in journalism, beat journalism and reporting, citizen journalism, and much more. If you come to film, television, and streaming platform studies, a lot of work is being done in animation. We still do a lot of good work in philosophy and aesthetics. People study directors, actors, writers, etc. The process of filmmaking itself is a huge field of research. Producing is a huge field of research. People study genre, styles, categories, series. And I think there's a huge body of very significant intellectual work coming out in the history of film, international cinema, and the relationship between literature and film, where you see a lot of adaptation work being done by people. Of course, critical cultural studies and media today are one of the most popular ways in which people conduct research by bringing in so many domains together. Representations of gender, of sexuality, of caste, class, religion, popular culture analysis, visual culture analysis, all that kind of works in media studies. And a lot of people today are working in very specific domains like communications and social change, communication and policy making. I think it is media policy is such an interesting topic to work in right now and so relevant. International communication, participatory communication, digital divide, rural communication, health communication. I think in a very, very COVID-19 context, think about something like health communication and the kind of work that can emerge from it. And of course, community and alternative media is something that is again like something that is really being worked upon. The strength of media research is that it is grounded in society, in communication, in the cultural understanding, and it involves common people. You know, it is one of those fields which is actually questioned a lot of things which were considered status quo in society, right? And therefore, it's so significant to talk about it. And I think this is the third point that I really want you to think about, that all mass media content from news, drama, advertising, video games, social media is about the stories we tell about ourselves as a society and as individual. So we have to understand who is producing it, how it is produced, what is it saying, and what kind of an effect does it have. And I think that kind of sums up a very significant way of understanding what is mass communication research or media research. I really want to, I don't know, how much time do I have? How much more time do I have?
Ma'am, another 20 minutes.
Oh, lovely. Then that's fine. Thank you. I really, I'm very fascinated with this particular blog on Times Higher Education. And I always use, this blog post that I have on my next slide, especially for my final year master's students when they write their dissertation. And the question is, why should I research? Why should we even conduct media research? And I love it. And I always say that just read it to understand why these are 20 important reasons to study the media. Simple, but I think it just lays the foundation. And if you can just go through it, how they kind of say that like every other discipline is important to be researched. Similarly, it is important to research media. And in the process, the simple blog post also tells you the relationship between media studies and so many domains from humanities and social sciences. So if you just look at the first point, it says like history, because the media interpret the past to us and show us what has gone into making us the way we are. Like geography, because the media define for us our own place in the world. I'm going to miss a few, or skip a few, but like literature, because the media are major sources of modern culture and entertainment. Like business, because the media are major industries and are inextricably involved in commerce. Like language, because media help define how we communicate with each other. Like family studies, because the media determine much of our cultural diet and we part of the fabric of our life. Like philosophy, because the media interpret our world, its values, its ideas to us. Like psychology, because they help us understand or misunderstand ourselves and others and so on. But like politics, because the media brings us political and ideological messages all the time. Like drama, because they help us to understand life by presenting it as larger than life and compel us to think in terms of the audience. And I love the 19th point in particular because it says like Everest, because they are there. The media is so important that it is therefore imperative. Something what Dr. Verma was talking about, that it is our duty to research it. We are a part of the domain. There are so many questions. It is our moral responsibility as academics to research the media. And don't forget, the media goes out of its way to study us all the time, to make judgments on people. And therefore, it is very important to study the media. And I think the question for a particular domain, which has had a very, very vocational or a professional orientation always, to kind of create an orientation which is academic for it, or which is, so to say, which talks about going back to the basics of understanding that subject theoretically and conceptually. It is important to always argue with yourself that why is it important to create that conceptual and theoretical dimension for that subject. And I think very simply, when I read this blog a few years ago, it kind of just hit me, because I thought, like, a lot of times you keep explaining to people that why media studies requires a theory of its own. Why does it have to have, even today people crib so much about like the identity of mass communication. What is it influenced by? What is so why is it not so exclusive? But imagine something that in its own genesis is an interdiscipline and a transdiscipline, offers us so many things to critically engage with. And I think that's the beauty of this particular domain, because it lets us do so many things. Okay, moving on. I also want to talk a little bit about the methodological traditions in media and communication research, which is the qualitative traditions, the quantitative and the mixed methods thing, and how does it emerge. But before I do this part, I want you to think, I'll come back to it, and I wanted to put this here because this is the reason why I'm going to be talking about for the next 10-15 minutes about the kind of things that I will be talking about. So that is precisely the reason, I'm going to talk about the methodological tradition in media and communication research, but they emerge from something, and that's what I want to focus on. So when you start thinking about research questions, the first, and I kind of created this presentation in a very how to do it in a very toolkit way, because frankly, I really looked at a very, very young early career researcher and early PhD scholars and people wanting to get into a PhD kind of an audience. And therefore, it is structured the way it is, right? So when you start thinking about researching, how do you start thinking about your research questions? There are very simple methods to start thinking about your research questions. What is it that's emerging in the literature in the field? That is the first thing that should always, and that is the emphasis that people give on reading the literature from your area. What is it that you're interested in? Why don't you go and read research literature in that area? And what are the issues that are emerging in literature that helps you have a question in place? In addition to that, what research problems could be answered to benefit society? What contemporary topics are being discussed in the media itself is a very good way to structure or think about your question. One very important thing is what experiences from your own background might lead to a research study. See, I've never kind of worked in an integration of media and science or something, but I did a BSc honors in botany before I did my master's in mass communication, because I lived during a time when we usually took sciences after our 10th class, and that's the way you kind of went on. And I remember when I kind of was in my graduation, and doing my BSc honors in botany, I used to edit the newspaper of my university. And because I edited the newspaper of my university, for the first time I realized I could do something different in life. And that was my journey to figuring out that if I write, what kind of courses can I do in my post-graduation? And because I could write well, I thought I can do journalism and mass communication. The kind of understanding we had when we figured out our professional or career journeys or academic journeys was very different from the times we live in now. Also, we didn't have Google. I was just thinking about it. Google completed something like 20 years of its existence, or 25 years recently. I was exactly 20 years. I turned 40 when Google turned 20. Imagine, for the first time in life, I could go to Google when I was 20 years old. And this is so weird to think about in a way, because you don't have multiple experiences of investigating a subject. And that's the opportunity that you have today, because there is something from your background that you can combine with some sort of open research about that area, and that can influence your work. For me, I did my PhD in children's television animation, especially representations of gender in children's animation. And what was the background? The background was I was a parent who had a 3-4-year-old daughter who was so addicted to the Japanese animation programs that used to come on TV. And because they were dubbed in Hindi, she became so sharp in her vocabulary in Hindi and the kind of effect it had on her. That was my background and my experience why I chose that topic for my PhD. And frankly, then the way I engaged with it, because my child grew in the process, right? But my research also expanded and grew in so many ways. So sometimes it is these experiences, that backgrounds that we come from that lead us to a certain research study. Of course, one very important thing is who can you collaborate with to develop your research problem and what kind of expertise would they bring in? For a lot of younger people, what are the issues that your faculty are researching, teaching, discussing? That would be a very significant cue to help structure your research questions. And a lot of us who may be interested in studying the industry may want to find out what are the issues that industry people are facing in the field. And from there, our question may emerge. And this is again like a very diagrammatic kind of a representation of the same thing. Existing literature, social concerns, what are the popular issues, what is your own background or personal characteristics, who can you brainstorm with, who's your peer group like, who are the kind of professors or faculty you engage with, is there anything to do with practitioners that can influence your research problem? So it's kind of a diagrammatic representation of the same thing that I spoke about in the previous slide. And again, gap spotting is another way to figure out what is your research question going to be. An overlooked area and under-researched areas, an area that lacks empirical support, if there is a specific aspect of a question that hasn't been looked at, and can you do something which can extend or complement existing literature? This is a very helpful toolkit when you are developing a research question. Something that you should really focus about when you're thinking about research, and this is what I will help us take us to like that particular slide, which is the methodological traditions in media and communication research, is the philosophy of research. A word that a lot of media and communication researchers forget about is to understand what is something called your epistemological position when you are researching. Please understand this. We all, so ontology and epistemology are words that come from the subject of philosophy, when philosophy of knowledge is discussed. But when we discuss philosophy of research, or how are we going to approach our research question, we also have to take philosophical positions. And what are those philosophical positions? See, it's extremely important to understand these two terms called ontology and epistemology, because we all have our ontological and epistemological positions when we think about our research question. Since all of us research broadly in the area of media mass communication, and ontology means the nature of reality. The nature of reality for us is all that exists in the media mass communication domain. So media and mass communication in that sense is our ontological position. But how do we look at the mass communication or media as a domain? How do we look at that reality? So for example, if I take you to my next slide, for me, somebody like me who works a lot on issues of gender and sexuality in popular culture, that's the constant way I look at media. I'm watching a series, my radar just kind of goes up when I look at issues of gender and culture. And all of us have certain ontological positions. So as a budding researcher, when you are researching the media, there is some aspect of the media that really inspires you, right? And that is how you look at reality. So figure out what is your ontological position. When you look at your ontological position, and going back to the previous slide, how do I look at it? See, in media studies, there are these epistemologically, there are these paradigms of research which are called positivism, constructivism, and pragmatism, right? A lot of us in media studies will understand that we are not positivists. We are all either constructivists or pragmatics. And why do I say so? Because positivism is something which is very, very objective. This leads to this, whether it happens in India or whether it happens in Nicaragua. That's the kind of philosophy that positivism is. So a lot of us who work in media studies work with an epistemological position which is either constructivist or pragmatic, which is, if I go to the next slide, epistemologically, if I'm somebody who studies gender and sexuality in popular culture, which is my ontological position, then my epistemological position, because it is subjective in nature, constructivist in nature, is theoretically influenced by similar domains in humanities or social sciences. So epistemologically, my work is influenced by feminism, postmodernism, literary criticism, hermeneutics, and hermeneutics refers to interpretation, those kind of things. And when I know what is my epistemological position, then I'm very clear about what is my methodological position. Because if my epistemological position is very, very constructivist or pragmatic, then I know that I also have to use methodological traditions that come from humanities and social sciences, you know. And if I take you back to the example, I want to use a qualitative methodology or a mixed methodology kind of a thing. So I may want to use, and methodology is a larger word. So qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods are methodologies. Under qualitative, we do interviews, we do textual analysis, we do focused groups and other things. These are methods. Similarly, under quantitative, we may do a quantitative content analysis, we may do a survey. That is a method. And in mixed methods, we may just adopt like a combination. So for somebody like me, I may want to do this study in a purely quanti way, which is using quanti content analysis and surveys. I may want to use purely qualitative methods where I will use semiotic analysis and interviews, for example. And if I want to do mixed methods, I may just want to combine content analysis and interviews. And just to help you understand, mixed methods doesn't always mean using both quali and quanti. Even if you use a combination of only qualitative methods, that's also a mixed method study. If you use a combination of quantitative methods, that is also a mixed method study. And for everybody to understand, positivism uses quantitative methods, but all quantitative research is not always positivist, because even in quantitative, we use a representative sample. So subjectivity comes in. So that's not positivist, that's constructivist. And that is something that you have to keep in mind. So the moment we have our ontological and epistemological positions clear, what will happen is that our research philosophy is something that will help us underpin our methodological choice, our research strategy, and our data collection techniques and analysis procedures. And therefore, this slide becomes extremely important, because if I know my position, am I doing qualitative work, am I doing some mixed methods work, or something else, then I also know what kind of theoretical traditions can influence my work. And this is therefore influenced by humanities and social sciences. So in humanities, our field is influenced significantly by rhetoric. Rhetoric would be something like analyzing speeches of politicians. That's a lot of work that happens in media studies or propaganda studies. We also do a lot of work in phenomenology, semiotics, literary criticism, film studies, feminism. And these are the kind of theories that help us draw a lot of understanding when we are pursuing qualitative work in media studies, which is influenced by humanity. From social sciences, we may be doing sociological analysis, we may be doing psychological analysis, political analysis, even political economy analysis when we study media companies, media organizations. That's the kind of work that comes in, and there we use a combination of qualitative and quantitative. And when our work is purely in the domain of culture studies, we may be doing a lot of ideology critique and ethnographies. So for example, if we want to study, say for example, media and the way it propagates godmen and godwomen through telecasting so much of content that's created by their organizations, and ethnographies of everyday cultural practices, that is how do common people associate with something like that. That's the kind of work that may emerge in culture studies. So these are the methodological traditions in media and communication research that we draw from humanities, social sciences, and cultural studies. And individually, I work a lot on children in media. I do a lot of work around media representations and reception analysis. I've worked a lot on understanding gender representations on television content for children. And I also have worked a lot with children, where I analyzed how children negotiate with their own gender identities when they interpret so much of content from television. I exclusively work a lot in television studies. I've worked a lot in the areas of soap operas and reality television. As a researcher, today I work significantly on streaming platforms. I recently conducted a study where I studied gender representations, how they are changing in a lot of content in the OTT platforms. And there are 2 studies that have come out of it. One is already published, one is in the pipeline. I do a lot of popular culture analysis work also. I started researching a lot on Japanese anime many years ago that are dubbed and they are telecast on Indian television. And recently I've been working a lot. I have 3 studies in pipeline. One is a book chapter, one is a research paper, and the third that's just going where we're doing data collection on different dimensions of Korean pop, which is called the Hallyu wave. I do work on discourses of identity on new media. That's what a few of my PhD scholars are currently working in. In journalism studies, I have earlier worked on news sensationalism, propaganda, and news coverage. And like I say, I focus a lot on gender and sexuality. And I use television, news media, OTT, advertising. I have a research paper where I've worked on the entire advertising discourse of Fair and Lovely. Now that they are wanting to change their name is a different issue altogether. But I also have focused a lot on audience analysis, reception studies, where I've primarily studied with I learned this. You never research on children or on audiences. What I learned in my research journey is that you research with them. And therefore, I focus a lot on interviews and focus group discussions where the audience has to be equally empowered to be a part of the research process. And as Dr. Pooja was mentioning earlier, I have an IMCR connection. IMCR is the biggest consortium of media communication researchers globally. It's called the International Association of Media and Communication Research, where I have learned to work a lot on a subject called critical media literacy. I'm the vice chair of the media education research section in that consortium, and that's helped me grow a lot in the last few years as a researcher. And I would really encourage you to be a part of some good conferences to get feedback and critique of your work, because that really helps you grow. And thank you, and I'm open to questions. And this image that I've put is simply for motivational purposes, and I leave you with that. Thank you so much, and when we kind of have the question answer session, I'll be open to having questions from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ruchi, for the wonderful talk. You discussed so many important aspects of media research, right from the conceptual and theoretical dimension of communication research to the philosophy of research in the changing times. Also, your area of research interests were really very enriching and interesting for each one of us. I'm sure the participants have many questions for you. I would request the participants to put their questions in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll take up all the questions together towards the end of the symposium. Our next speaker of the day is Dr. Vikas Dogra. Dr. Vikas Dogra is Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication at Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla. He has been engaged in mass communication, teaching, learning, research, and practice for over 2 decades now. Dr. Dogra holds a doctorate in journalism and mass communication from Himachal Pradesh University and Masters in Mass Communication from Punjab University, Chandigarh. A keen researcher and academician, Professor Dogra has authored a book titled Identity Matters: Enduring Media Influence, which examines the identity in a power equation with media. He has also contributed many chapters and published several research papers in national and international journals of repute. He has also guided many PhD scholars. Professor Dogra's research interests include media and socio-cultural interface, media effects, journalism, and development communication, along with a special interest in active audience research. He has also presented his research work at several national and international fora. Professor Dogra brings with him a rich experience of having worked in television journalism and production, radio, print journalism, content management, graphic designing, and short film production. He has also worked as a communication consultant for reputed national and international organizations. Professor Dogra, we are all looking forward to your talk, so over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja, and thank you organizers for this opportunity. I, on my screen, can't see an option to share the screen. Probably the organizers can enable me.
Yes.
Please enable
Yes,
the presentation
Yes.
on the screen on which I'm not visible. My video is off. I've logged in
Sir,
from 2 accounts.
you are not logging from that device, sir. You are right now. You are only logging single device.
Okay. If you can give me a second. Okay. Am I logged in from the second one now? No.
No, sir.
Okay. In that case, may I request you to give the opportunity to present to my colleague, Mr. Virender. Virender, are you there?
Yes, he's coming in panel, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, now he's in panel, sir.
Okay. Virender, can you present? Has he been given the permission to present?
Yes, sir, he has, sir.
Okay. Virender, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Present कर रहे हो?
हाँ सर कर रहा हूँ सर, अटैच कर रहा हूँ सर.
Okay. So we have had a very fruitful morning till now. Thank you to the entire Amity University team, Professor Verma, Professor Pooja, for inviting me here. And as a prelude, I must say that, as Professor Ruchi also said, we have made these presentations keeping in mind our target audience, which is the young researchers in communication studies. Virender, can you enter the full screen mode? Okay, so Dr. Ruchi has made a very brilliant presentation, and I must congratulate her on this. And she's almost taken us through the entire journey of mass communication studies, what is expected. And she's talked about some very relevant points from the paradigms of research and how, there are there's like such multifacetedness in communication research, and how there are so many complexities which are involved in the practice of communication research, and why we should research. She basically brought to life what Professor Yuan Singh said earlier in his opening remarks, that we have to explore the creative possibilities in research. Now, exploring those creative possibilities, the kind of areas, especially the kind of the convergence perspective that Professor Ruchi has presented to us through her very beautiful illustration of how culture, the cultural context interacts with so many realities, and then the communication situations that throw up several issues which need researching. I'll just try to take that a little forward with my presentation. And as I said, it is meant for only young researchers. And it is basically based on my years of experience with several young researchers, those who are doing master's studies and then also intending to do a PhD or an MPhil, and then evaluation of PhD theses from around the country, and how many of us are missing a point. What Professor Ruchi and the different areas that she explored, yes, they are to be explored, but practically on ground, what is happening, that is what I'm going to talk about currently. We're in the next slide, please. So, most of the communication students would recognize this very basic model, which is basically a model from Harold Laswell, who says what in which channel to whom with what effect. Now, I'm not going to talk about this model, so don't be, don't get scared. All I'm trying to tell you is that, if we look at the current research which is happening, it is basically various permutations and combinations of what all these 5 elements in a communication scenario they talk about. It's very similar to what Professor Ruchi talked about in her linear presentation of the communication studies or communication research. This basically, you can see on your screens, talks about, when we are talking about the communicator, we are talking about control analysis, that is in terms of research. If you are talking about the message, we are talking about content analysis. If we are talking about media, the medium, then we are talking about the media analysis. Then if you are talking about receiver, it's audience analysis. And if you're talking about effect, then effect analysis. But then effect analysis are as varied as they come, from effect of something on somebody to, and this something and somebody can be anything. There are limitless possibilities to what kind of these effects that we tend to look for, or we tend to, analyze in our research. But then the control analysis, we can, I've given just a few examples of what control analysis or content analysis or media analysis could mean. So in control analysis, you could be talking about different types of senders. So we could be talking about the broadcasters, we could be talking about the advertisers, or the politicians, or so basically who our sender is. Then we are also talking about power systems and the economic and political systems in which these people exist, or in which these senders exist. Then in content analysis, we are talking about fiction or non-fiction. We are, content can be text, audio, visual, oral, or as Ruchi said, even anime, various kinds of content that we are talking about. Then the content also has some context. It has an intent, it has a meaning. So all of these things make various kinds of content. Then medium, when we are talking about, yes, obviously the OTT, print, electronic, digital, social media. Then the media can also have various levels of richness. They may offer various levels of control or various level of access. Now, these are, again, throw up several permutations and combinations of what a medium can be. And then we have the receiver. Receiver can have different needs, identities, traits, participation in the process of creation or transmission of the message. Now, as we can see, in all of these areas, there are several permutations and combinations possible. And within this permutations and combinations in these 5 areas, one can go ahead and then match any of them with any of the other. Any of control analysis with any from the content analysis, with any from the media analysis, with any from the audience analysis. And then that throws up our research topics generally. Sadly in India, we haven't gone beyond, a permutation combination scenario within this, scope. Within the next, please. Next slide, please. We're in the second slide, please. Yeah. So to do that kind of research, we have several methodologies. One of them is quantitative. We all are very well aware of that. Within quantitative, we have basically three methods to do that quantitative analysis. We have the statistics, which we all are very familiar with. Then there are mathematical models, and then there are computation models, which are obviously beyond the scope of any social science researchers. But yes, nowadays people have started collaborating and doing those kind of analysis as well. But then we also have qualitative methods. Professor Ruchi has given us an overview of what all those methods are, and then obviously the mixed methods. But sadly, what we are saddled with is that we are usually very lazy, and we restrict ourselves to the teaching and learning of quantitative research methods only, which means basically descriptive statistics. Next one, please. Now, this lazy bone research, basically what you can see on your screen, means that we are generally very lazy, both in the teaching as well as in the practice of research. When you join a journalism department or a communication studies department, in most universities, I'm not painting all with the same brush, but when I use most, I know what I'm saying. The research methods or the approach to research is quite lazy. It's generally either too simplistic or too simple. Too simple in the sense, I'll show you with my examples next how we think of research or conceptualize research very simplistically. Or then it is purposeless, we don't know why we are doing it, or there is no direction. For example, usually you'll find that there is not a credible or a good enough theoretical perspective to it, or a theoretical framework to the research. Then, which makes this research very conceptually weak. Then methodologically, it is also very weak, because even if you are using statistics, generally it is, people are talking about only percentages. I'm not saying percentages don't tell you anything, but then in terms of research, in terms of giving depth to the research, in terms of giving validity and credibility to the research, we need to go a little deeper. And as a result of this, because we are directionless, pointless, and then we don't have usually a theoretical framework, the research or the analysis goes nowhere. Next one, please. So what we need to do is basically look for an issue around us when we are conducting research and create a problem. Create a problem as in problematize it. And when I'm saying all this, I'll talk about all of these things with examples, which you will see in a little while. And then we can add dimensions and layers. I'll just show you how, again, that for example, if you're talking about user studies, then how you can go from a unidimensional or a dual dimensional being to a three-dimensional being. Because when you are thinking of antecedents of your research subjects, you are also adding some depth, some more layers to the research study, which also tend to make it more rich and interesting. Then find perspective. You would remember from Professor Ruchi's slides that she was talking about so many fields which influence mass communication research and mass communication education, in fact. So these are sociological and psychological, political, historical, economic, market, managerial, legal, educational. You can add as many as you can, because there is no field, especially in humanities, which would not affect or which would not have interaction with media studies or communication studies. And then look beyond positivistic approach. Professor Ruchi did say that media researchers are not positivists. Well, that may be true for most of the world, but in our country, what we are seeing is basically positivist research. You basically intend to have some data to prove what you set out to prove. And then, once you have proven them, you make that into a research theory. And then once you have, set your mind on all of the above, you shake them up, and you create something which is a credible research. Next one, please. Now, this is what I've been promising, that how we can go about all of this. So I'll explain all of the above, all of the earlier things that I've said with this one example. And I hope you find it useful. And this example will stretch through rest of my presentation. Next. Okay. So what we have here is basically that, if you talk to someone, a new researcher, about a research study that somebody comes to you with a proposal, usually the proposal is, why somebody uses this. For example, why people use television, why people watch, movies, or why people do that, which is basically now a very hackneyed way of looking at research, in the sense that it obviously shows that we are not reading enough, we are not attuned enough into what is happening around the world, and where media research has gone to. So we are stuck in the 90s, probably, with the active audience research, but that is what my experience tells me. So this is one example I've taken up from that experience. For example, if you want to study why people use social media. Now, in this, what would be your parameters of research? First, you'll have to define a population or a universe. So what those people are. Then social media, as we all know, has a large scope, but still people come to me with proposals, or there are research studies which come to me where they're talking about social media as one entity, which is a little disturbing, especially coming from the media scholars. But then it is happening all the time. So, the defining the scope of of social media, that is important. For example, even Facebook, if somebody zeroes in on Facebook, then why somebody is using Facebook? Now, Facebook is not one platform. Facebook is a combination of several platforms. For example, there are Facebook groups, which is an example I'll be using for my further explanation of this thing. Then the user, who are the users? Who is using social media? So, then there are various ways of defining this user. For example, somebody who's ever used the social media, or has used it in 6 months, or has used it in 1 year, or you use an industry or international standard to define a user. Then the second dimension we add to the user usually is the socioeconomic class of the person, or the frequency of usage, or the circumstances in which the media is being used. Is the presentation gone? I cannot see the presentation.
Sir, it's unshared right now.
Virender, are you there?
I think he has some network issue or something.
Ajay, are you there?
Do I have to promote anyone?
Yeah, Ajay Kumar. I'm sorry for this, but we are in Himachal, and Dr. Manish would have sympathies with me on this.
Now, sir, Ajay sir is in panel, sir.
Okay. Dr. Ajay, can you share the presentation?
Yes, sir, I can share presentation. Give me a second, sir. So can you see?
Okay. Yeah, I can. Thank you, Ajay.
Welcome, sir.
So we add a second dimension. Then when we talk about why people use, then you will have people coming up with random reasons why there could be somebody using the social media. And those reasons are constructed just out of common sense. They are not based on any theoretical framework. And as a result, the analysis is a set of tables. Then there could be like difference between the user categories or cross tabulations amongst, let's say, different age groups or different economic groups. And at the end, at the most, you'll find certain correlations, and that will be the end of the study. Next one, please. So how do we go beyond it, and what can be done beyond it? So let's explore that. Ajay? So, let's think of one researcher who reads enough, because not reading enough is one of the problems in research. So who reads enough, and suddenly, one stumbles upon a theoretical concept which is called active audience. Next. So this researcher explores, or, Ajay, please stop. Okay, now this researcher stumbles upon something called uses and gratifications. Uses and gratifications basically is a theory which took its roots basically in 1972 by Blumler, McWhale, and Brown. And it is one of the active audiences research theories. And it talks about several reasons why people could be using research. Another one could stumble upon the next theory by Katz, Gurevich, and Haas in 1973. And basically talk about other needs or uses or gratifications that people may find from using certain media or consuming certain media. Now, I don't need to go into, I'm not teaching you uses and gratification theory. It's just to remind all of you researchers that yes, we have this study, and that this researcher who's done some research explores this, stumbles upon this, and decides to use this. Next. So this was our starting point where we wanted to do why people use social media. Next. But then after you have a theoretical framework, which is uses and gratifications, your questionnaire will evolve suddenly, and it will have questions on, do you think the use of social media helps you escape reality? On a scale of 1 to 5, please say how much do you agree? Or on a scale of 1 to 5, to what extent do you think social media or use of social media helps you with emotional release, or helps you with social conversation, helps you with companionship? Now, this is what we have gained from using theoretical framework, which is uses and gratifications. Now, remember, it is not, usually people think it's a uses and gratification study. No, it is a study of why people are using social media, where uses and gratifications becomes a theoretical framework to explore that. Next one, please. Now, the resultant study will have studies on queries on need gratification, or motives for exposure, or uses or utility, or gratification sought and obtained. Now, these are the standard things that people have explored in uses and gratification things, and it has been going on since the field opened up to public domain. And then the standard ways of measurement are true or false questions, or as I explained, the Likert type scale questions. And analyses are direct reporting and at most factor analysis of the needs which have been explored. Next. So, but then that researcher who was reading in the library could have also explored probably other active audience theories, which are reception analysis. So I've categorized them, and it's not the only categorization of the active audience theories, but for this purpose, I think it should do that. You have Stuart Hall's reception analysis, that is encoding and decoding. Then we have second level agenda setting. Within reception analysis, I've included it. Most people will not agree with me, but I tend to look at it like this, that second level agenda setting I would consider under reception analysis. Anyways, we have learning theories from constructivism to information processing theory to social learning theory. Then And interestingly, the using gratifications has its roots in social learning theory. Then we have cognitive dissonance theory, which is the cognition studies, and then selective exposure theory. Then you have function analysis, in which we have activation theory of information exposure, which is again, an offshoot of using gratifications research methodology. Then so basically, there are several active audience theories, but then because most of the studies that we come across in our, let me not call them substandard journals, but journals with not enough exposure, are focusing still on UG. That is where we are stuck. Next one, please. Now, if we look beyond active audience, what can we find? One, you could have used any of the earlier active audience theories, but then let's say if you look beyond active audience theory, so you have Goffman's dramaturgical analysis, and he gave this theory in his book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday, and it borrows heavily from theater, and it talks about the imagery of theater, how it is used to portray the importance of human social interaction. And as a result, you have a resultant theory called the self-presentation theory, that people have desired to control the impressions that others form about them. That is the basic assumption, and that the relationship between performance and life is evident in these social interactions, and that an actor, this is very important, an actor performs on a setting constructed of a stage and a backstage. So you have you are all the time performing as a communicator, and there's a stage and a backstage, like in theater. And the props in both the settings, that is on the stage and on the backstage, they direct his actions, and he's being watched by an audience. But in effect, also he is also watching the audience, and he's an audience for his viewers' play, that viewers are acting for him. Now, why am I talking about only this? Because when you look beyond UG, my contention has been that UG, or the active most of the active audience theories, they were constructed for the messages or the media, which was unidirectional, where content was being served to the audiences, and they were only on the receiving end. But now we are talking about social media, where the content is being created. It's like a conversation. It's like our day-to-day interaction. So can we, for example, analyze why do we have conversations under the UG framework? I don't agree with that. I don't agree with most studies which happen under the UG framework on on social media. But that has been somehow the case, all along. My disagreements apart, we'll move on. Ajay, next one, please. So, so common sense will tell us, because we are talking about conversation between people. So social media and self-presentation theory seem to be made for each other. But then there are several others. For example, social information processing theory, social identity model of de-individuation effects, the social construction of reality theory, the social exchange theory, and then there is a concept called the internet paradox. It's not a theory, it's just a concept. But I sometimes just think that if you explore any of these theories with the internet paradox, how much more interesting a study would become. Next one. So social information processing theory basically says that online interpersonal relationships may demonstrate the same relational dimensions and qualities as face-to-face relationships. And there are three phases of a relationship, that is impersonal, interpersonal, and hyperpersonal. Now, in impersonal, where in the online mode, impersonal mode tends to be longer because you don't initially trust a person, and then it's an interpersonal mode, and hyperpersonal you tend to reach very early on as compared to the offline mode, because you tend to present the best of yourself. So it basically talks about impression management, and because you are always managing your impressions, so it becomes hyperpersonal very soon. Now, this is one theory I think I would like to use for social analysis of social media, or for example, the side model or side theory, which explains the effect of anonymity and identifiability on group behavior. an alternative explanation for effects of anonymity and other de-individuation factors on group behavior. Identification of self through online group lessens one's actual idea of personal identity outside the online spaces. Even when personal identity is seemingly salient in online spaces, it is still further dissociates the person with themselves outside the online community. So basically, that the more you interact online, your offline communications also get affected. Now, this would take you back to probably the reinforcement theory, or it's escaping my mind. Anyways, the next one. Then social construction of reality. This theory basically talks about how meaning is embedded in society, that knowledge and people's conception and belief of what reality is becomes embedded in the institutional fabric of the society. So when you are interacting online, you create conversations, you create your own realities online, which get transported to the real world, or even it becomes the reality of that particular conversation that you're having online. Next one, please. Social exchange theory. We choose to communicate through a context of rewards and costs. Key concepts of social exchange theory include reciprocity, fairness, and negotiated rules, with information, approval, respect, power gain, and personal satisfaction among the rewards in successful transactions. Now, again, is this not what you would like to explore for the analysis of social media? Why or how conversations are happening on social media? How communication is happening on social media? And then we have the concept of internet paradox. Next one. Now, paradox basically talks about how we are suspicious of the technology, but we still want to include technology, and that social technology reduces social involvement and psychological well-being. Now, it is a paradox. We still want it. We don't want it. So within this framework, if any of these study or theories were used, let's imagine how would our study, or the why people use social media, would flower. Next one, please. But then somebody may ask, what are the methodological issues involved and how can we go about doing it? So if we go back to the social learning theory, or the UG theory, and as I told you, it evolved from social learning theories. So learning is a cognitive process that takes place in a social context and can occur purely through observation and direct instruction, even in the absence of motor reproduction or direct reinforcement. This would remind you of Skinner. Then social learning theory basically talks about new behaviors can be acquired by observing and imitating others. But the most important part, which influenced the development of use and gratification theory, was that a behavior rewarded regularly persists, a behavior constantly punished will desist. Now, again, I will not tell you or go into how, but I'm just telling you that how this one sentence or this one assumption of the theory went on to evolution of a UG theory. Next one, please. So, in 1954, you had Abraham Maslow coming up with hierarchy of needs. From 1950s to 60s, you have Atkinson giving you expectancy value theory, which was heavily borrowed by the UG theory and incorporated in the evolution of the framework. And in 1963, Bandura came up with the social learning theory. Till all of these, merged together, or something was drawn from all of them. And in 1972, you had UG theory. And from there on, there is no limit to the number of ways how UG has been used and abused, and how many kinds and types of uses have been introduced and explored. There's no end to that. Next one, please. So if that can be done, why not? Why can't any of these theories be used for our research purposes? Next one. So, as I said earlier, move beyond positivism. explore qualitative research techniques of data collection. And how do you go about it? There are several ways of doing it. You have discourse analysis, under which you have conversation analysis, critical discourse analysis, rhetorical criticism, then you have narrative analysis. Ajay, can you press the next button? Next button. Yeah. So discourse analysis, as you all know, is a study of social life understood through analysis of language in its widest sense, including face-to-face talk, non-verbal interactions, images, symbols, and documents. It offers ways of investigating meaning, whether in conversation or in culture, or analysis of language beyond the sentence. So discourse analysis can also be, summarized as analysis of language beyond the sentence. Now, if that is how, those are the possibilities of discourse analysis, I would say that it talks about face-to-face talk, non-verbal interaction, images, symbols, documents. Would this not make just about the right, methodology of analyzing social media content or analyzing social media conversations? Next one. Then we have conversation analysis, an approach to the study of social interactions embracing both verbal and non-verbal conduct in a situation of everyday life. Conversation analysis originated as sociological method, but has since spread to other fields. Now, again, if you look at what all it is studying, it is basically studying verbal and non-verbal conduct in situations of everyday life. So the social media conversations, are they not now a part of everyday life? Next one. Critical discourse analysis. It is again, a part of discourse, part of discourse analysis, but differs only in the sense that it highlights the issues of power asymmetries, manipulation, exploitation, and structural inequalities. Now, in social media, especially in social media groups, are there not power equations? Do they not, beseech exploration or analysis? Next one. Then we have rhetorical criticism. Now it analyzes symbols, symbolic artifacts of discourse. What are those? Words, phrases, images, gestures, performance, text, films, etc. that people use to communicate. Now, again, which of them is not a part of social media analysis, or social media discourse? Next one, please. Narrative analysis uses fields such as text, personal stories, autobiographies, journals, field notes, letters, conversation, interviews, family stories, photographs, and other artifacts as life experience as the units of analysis. Now, again and again, my point is that, these are things that we are, which are giving us so many opportunities for exploration, for research. Why are we not doing it? Next one. Then we have the interpretative phenomenological analysis, IPA, which is an approach to psychological qualitative research with an ideographic focus. Basically, most of you would recognize it as FGDs, in-depth interviews, or diaries. Now, again, these give us much more richness into our data than our regular questionnaires can, our regular quantitative questionnaires can. I'm not against quantitative studies. As you would see, quantitative is something that we all need all the time, but it's not like we can't do without it. Next one. How much time do I have? Have I already overshot?
No, it's fine, sir.
Okay.
It's fine.
So I'll take you back to my, where my example started, that how, we can, create some more layers to this basic research problem. Next one. So I'll talk about how the user can be made, the two-dimensional user can be made a three-dimensional user. So we can add layers to the user, which is, you can talk about the identity, personality, capacity, efficacy. So there are several ways you can look at the user, and then use those layers to enrich the analysis and to have some more depth to the research. Next one, please. Okay, next one. Okay, so this is where we were, basically where our research problem started. You have young adults, you define your people. As I said, one would have to define your population. So let's say you say young adults from 18 to 25 years of age. Then social media. So instead of just saying social media, you define the scope and you call it interest-based Facebook groups. Then first dimension of the user, you call it as frequency of use. Instead of being, let us say, purposive, we make it more probability-based sampling, and we call it a frequency of use of researcher and of the user. And then you also add the second dimension, which is social economic status, and then the circumstances. But then, how do you add the third dimension? Ajay, okay, stop. So you use the big 5 personality traits. Let's say, for example, you take a concept from psychology and you use that. And what are those big 5 personality traits? Next one. So those big 5, and it is like a very basic thing, although the big 5 traits have had several changes since this one, but this was where it started. So openness to experience. You can talk about these 5 kinds of personalities: people who are open to experience, who are conscientious, then who are extroverts, who are agreeable, and who are neurotics. Now, then within these, you can have a personality inventory to basically categorize your users. And then imagine when you have all these people in different categories, and then when you do the cross tabulations and cross analysis, it would add so many layers. Next one. Then you also add a theoretical framework, which is social exchange. Social exchange theory, as we have already talked about, basically talks about that we choose to communicate through a context of rewards and costs. Key concepts include reciprocity, fairness, negotiated rules with information, approval, respect, power, group gain, and personal satisfaction among rewards in successful transactions. Now, this is all that we can explore through the theoretical framework, and hypotheses can be developed around that. Next one. Then the methodology that you can use can be narrative analysis. And what narrative analysis is? It is the use of fields such as text, stories, autobiographies, basically any artifacts and life experiences as units of analysis. Next one. So the next step would be to take consent and you join a Facebook group to do an immersive study, and you do a data collection, which is, as I said, I'm not against quant. So it will be both a combination of quantitative and qualitative. And the quantitative data could be like, about the 1D first dimension of the user, which is the frequency. Second dimension, socioeconomic class, or the situation of use, or the place of use, or the circumstances of use of social media. And the third dimension, where you would have a personality inventory, the big 5 inventory, to analyze or to take data to analyze the user's personality. Then the qualitative. For qualitative, you would need both depth interview and content analysis. And I'm sorry, but I would be, including narrative analysis under content analysis for this particular study. Okay, hypothesis. So our first assumption was from our theoretical framework, which was the social exchange, that we choose to communicate through a context of rewards and costs. Now, using this, we can have our first hypothesis that respondents join groups where they perceive a benefit. Now, how do you go about it? How do you go about collecting data about it? How do you incorporate this hypothesis, or how do you deal with this hypothesis in your questionnaire? You could have a self-reporting, in-depth interview with your respondents, with the participants of that group. then you could have a hypothesis number 2, that is respondents' participation in group conversation is in direct proportion to the expectations of reward. Now, this is all coming from assumption number 1, that is we choose to communicate through a context of rewards and costs. So first one is that respondents join groups where they perceive a benefit. Now, what those benefits are, they will depend on the purpose of the group. But then respondents' participation in the group. One is you join the group. Second is how much you participate in the group conversation is in direct proportion to the expectation of reward. Now, again, for this, how you would go about it in data collection is you would have content analysis, a quantitative content analysis of each user's participation in that group's conversation. Then you have a third hypothesis coming out of the same assumption, which is direct engagement of respondents with group members correlates with expectations of a benefit. So how much do people interact directly with each other? Now, you could have a quantitative content analysis, but then outside of the group, how much people are conversing with each other. Within the group, yes, you can find out, but outside of the group, and then that there was an expectation of benefit from that particular member. So you would need to do a self-reporting depth interview with that, with your selected respondents. So this is how one theory can give you one assumption, and on the basis of that you can have some hypothesis. Then assumption number 2 from the same theory, and here comes the qualitative part. How it will enrich the study. That assumption is that reciprocity, fairness, and negotiated rules with information approval, respect, power, group gain, and personal satisfaction are the rewards in successful transactions. So basically, how we define successful transaction, that the person is able to formulate strong interpersonal relationships. That is what we will, how we will interpret successful transaction for the purpose of our study. Now, how do you go about it? You form a hypothesis. Hypothesis will be that interpersonal relationships outside the Facebook group between 2 Facebook group members is in direct proportion to the mutual approval of personal opinions. Our assumption is that reciprocity with or the approval of your opinions or of what you are sharing are rewards in successful transactions. So basically, if we go back to Skinner, you have a behavior which is repeated because there is a reward. So based on that knowledge, we are able to formulate a hypothesis that interpersonal relationships, even outside the Facebook groups, between 2 particular Facebook group members is in direct proportion to the mutual approval of personal opinions. So basically, the strength of interpersonal relationships, you will find out using quantitative content analysis and qualitative depth interview. But then the mutual approval of opinions, whether people are approving each other or whether they're giving them a thumbs up or what their comment means, or if there is a discussion, you would need narrative analysis. Next one.
Professor Dogra?
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
We are loving your presentation. It's very.
I'm wrapping up.
We have many questions, so for the benefit of the.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up.
Thank you very much.
So basically, the narrative analysis, you will take personal opinions of expressed in the group conversation as units of analysis and couple it with the assumption that these are reflections of meanings that the respondents associate with the object as in what is being discussed in their lives. Next one, please. So basically, you have all this, and then you imagine that the possibilities that those 5 personality traits, the third dimension that we added, would add to your study. So takeaway is, don't be lazy. You have to read. You have, think about adding layers. Forget about having one theory for everything where you can explain or where you can, let's say, have one theory which establishes you as the researcher and says something which nobody has said before. You can think of adding to the existing body of knowledge bit by bit. Think beyond positivism. Think of having more qualitative studies, and then publish more. All the former speakers have said there are not many opportunities, or there were not many opportunities in the past, but now of late we have seen that there are many opportunities which are coming up. So you should think of publishing more. With that, I'll wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dogra, for this wonderful presentation. You spoke about the importance of theoretical framework for a substantial research while sharing your concerns as a researcher. The discussion on various communication theories was very pertinent today, and I'm sure that your talk will act as a guiding light for the young researchers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would now invite Professor Divya.
And my apologies to the next speaker for eating into her time.
You're good, you're good. I would now request Professor Divya Sharma to deliver her talk. Professor Sharma holds a PhD in sociology, and her research focuses on immigration, globalization, and ethnic identity, and organized crime and terrorism. She has been using mixed methods to study these topics and has collected data from India, Kenya, and the United States. Professor Sharma has published several peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters and submitted many technical reports. Her work has been cited in various academic articles, conference presentations, books, and other publications. Professor Sharma also has expertise in conducting field research, survey research, and program and policy evaluation. Her most recent projects include the YDU program at Garner Correctional Institution in Newtown, another program at Bridgeport Police Department's Community Services Division, apart from studying crime in Delhi and refugees and forced migrants in Western India. Professor Sharma has developed and taught numerous courses in sociology, crime justice, and homeland security. A recipient of Ansel Outstanding Faculty Member Award, Professor Sharma has been supervising student research projects and has served on many elected and appointed committees, including Curriculum, Ethics Committee, and Distance Education, e-learning, and being part of program development, assessment, and review. We're all looking forward to your talk, Professor Sharma. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me see if I can now find a way to share this. Is my PowerPoint visible?
Not right now.
No, ma'am.
How about now?
Ma'am, you have shared the screen. So can you please open the PPT in your presentation? Right now you have shared the Zoom screen, ma'am.
I think that's what I did when we were testing it, or did I do something else?
I think you need to open the PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, ma'am, you just open the
display
PowerPoint.
on the screen. So you can.
Oh, just a sec.
Yeah.
How about now?
Ma'am, you have shared the Zoom screen. They do not share the Zoom screen.
Yeah.
अरविंद जी ये इनको बंद करके वापस जाना पड़ेगा ना?
Yeah, I opted, ma'am. Now, ma'am, do it once again.
Okay.
Dr. Verma, are you on your email? I can just forward my presentation to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I've just sent it. This is the Murphy's Law.
No worries.
Did you get it?
1 second. Give me a second. Okay.
I'm sorry about this. I'm doing exactly what we did about, at the start to test
No
it.
worries, no worries. Just give me a second.
This is research in action.
Yeah.
Everything that can go wrong will go wrong.
No. There's some.
Did you receive it, Dr. Verma?
Yeah.
Oh,
अरविंद जी
cool.
मैं आपको भेज दूं क्या आप कर देंगे?
No, sir, because I have to do something else. Because if I share, I can't see the Zoom platform.
Okay, okay. डॉक्टर पूजा मैं आपको भेज रहा हूँ, मेरे भी कुछ टेक्निकल इशू हो रहा है.
Right, sir.
In the meantime, Divya, you can start with
Sure.
yes,
Sure.
please.
Sorry about that once again. Good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you all are doing well and following all the instructions during this pandemic, taking good care of yourself and, of course, of people around you. It was a delight to hear Dr. Yuan Singh's remarks, especially about creative writing and its expressions and varied medium, as creative writing is where I get my high. Thank you, Dr. Manish Verma, for putting together this symposium and giving me an opportunity to interact with scholars and students in this part of the world. It's always a delight. Thank you, Dr. Rana, for that very kind introduction and, of course, helping me out getting this PowerPoint going. I hope that after these two very insightful presentations by Dr. Jaggi and Dr. Dogra, you're still interested in listening to me because I do have a slightly different take on a lot of issues that we are discussing under methodology. I'm actually one of those people who grew up thinking how not to have a career in academia. And that was because my parents were professors, all our family friends were professors, literally half of our relatives were, somewhere or the other in higher education. So I tried everything to escape it. After a few part-time jobs in Chandigarh, I made my way to Nairobi in Kenya, where I was working as a radio jockey for an FM radio. It was a Bollywood radio. But I soon started to get calls about domestic violence, abuse, identity, immigration issues from my listeners, predominantly Indians. For me, it was an interesting but strange experience as I didn't know them. And I was like, how come they are connecting to me? Why are they sharing it with me? I was still in my early 20s and just kind of chilling, having fun, I guess. But it became the topic of my PhD on the issues of ethnicity, immigration, and identity crisis. Though I was still uninterested in being an academic, I went to the US and decided to study topics of crime and justice a bit more systematically. And that's where I got converted to becoming an academic. And the rest is 20 years of learning, teaching, doing research, and of course, having great fun. Never stop doing that. So when I was told about the topic of today's symposium, I jumped at the idea, but soon started to think how to relate it to my expertise and narrow it down to something specific, tangible, as I did not want it to become one of those lectures where I would just, list a bunch of concepts for you to jot down or give you one definition after the other in a rather pedantic, academic manner. And you'll check off a box that, right, we attended a symposium, mission accomplished. So instead of that, I decided to go with a more conversational style, where I'll give you some concepts and key terms, but mostly, and I hope to give you food for thought. That is, I hope to make this topic something real, something tangible, the ideas that you can relate to and understand, and most importantly, apply to the issues that surround you or the topics that dominate your media space. So from all the wonderful to some crazy ideas that crossed my mind, for today's presentation, being a criminologist, I decided to focus on communication and media research about topics of crime and justice. That is how media, especially news and social media, communicate about these topics, and how to possibly address some of the issues in media research. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you know, today, everyone seems to have an opinion on almost everything, be it economics, politics, international affairs, Bollywood, oceans in New Zealand, Dhoni's retirement for that matter, everybody's debating that, ethics, philosophy, history, but especially and above all, matters of crime and justice. Even the discussions about politics or international affairs, and now it seems even Bollywood, are centered around crime, justice, social justice, bias, discrimination, abuse, corruption, and so on. Even within the media itself, there are debates about ethics, preset biases, ideological agendas, and the whole framing of victims and offenders. So you cannot really escape the topics of crime and justice. And the most common medium to share all the opinions is, of course, media, in particular, social media. I don't know how many of you have heard of MySpace. That was Facebook before Facebook. And if none of you has heard of it, then I feel really old, but I'll let that slide. But social media has grown leaps and bounds since then. So it no longer gets the otherly treatment by the mainstream media. In fact, most online news portals now have a section about what's trending on social media. Most news agencies have a social media presence. And increasingly, social media trends are setting the day's agenda in many newsrooms around the world. So everyone has an opinion on everything and everyone is sharing it. However, it is no rocket science to notice that there is little effort in checking the veracity of such information. And the trends that populate the media space are accepted as something legitimate and organic. It reminds me of a question that was asked to a Bollywood actor about the anti-CAA protests. And he replied that if so many people are protesting against it, then there must be some problem in it. Fine. But by that logic, you can take the other position that if so many people are supporting it, then there must be something right about it. I'll keep the discussion surrounding the CAA for some other day, but logically speaking, as a student, scholar, or someone who plans to build a career in media and communication, or someone who is teaching or doing research in the field, the above statement is emblematic of illogical reasoning, at least on two accounts. Firstly, the assumption that every public figure, be it a Bollywood personality or any other industry, would be or should be well informed about every topic. Therefore, the media personnel presenting and analyzing these statements for the larger audience must be able to separate opinion from facts. There's no need to have a debate around every statement by everyone or taking every opinion as a logical opinion. It's just an opinion. Secondly, the assumption that if a crowd is behind something, then it must be correct. If something is trending, then it must be correct. It does not mean that we dismiss mass movements as an illogical or manipulated mob. I mean, Jessica Lal's case, Nirbhaya's case are just two of the many examples of the meaningful impact of mass movements in recent memory. Sometimes mass movements are also expressions of larger discontent, and we must recognize that. But recognizing it is not same as legitimizing every opinion backed by a crowd. That is why, as we conduct research or supervise it, it is critical to keep an objective mind and root arguments in evidence. I'll give you another example, a simple example that I often use. If you ask about 1,000 people if the Earth is a triangle or not, and let's say 700 people, that's 70%, say yes, it's a triangle. Would you conclude that the Earth is a triangle, or that a large number of people are uninformed about the shape of the Earth? I hope it's the latter. It does not mean that your effort to collect data, in this case on the shape of the Earth, has gone to waste. Rather, it gives you great insight that the people in the setting where you are conducting research do not have fact-based information. So again, I must emphasize, separate opinion from facts. What if tomorrow majority of people said that all women should stop going out of their homes after 6 p.m.? Would you accept it as a legitimate argument because majority of people say it? Or would you try to explore why people have these attitudes or opinions? From the research perspective, it means that just describing what you find is not enough. It's only the first step. The media research needs to explore, that is, understand why people believe what they believe, and also step into the realm of evaluation, that is, how to inform and communicate with the larger public a lot better. In fact, illogical reasoning is one of the everyday errors in social science that many of you may have heard about. We call it an everyday error, as it's a very common error. So in conducting research empirically, especially in media studies, we need to train students and scholars to separate opinions and feelings from empirical reality, that is, reality rooted in evidence. Next slide, please. Thank you. From the media and communication perspective, the challenge is not just how to communicate, but what to communicate. And that includes identifying such errors. Unfortunately, media has become more polarized and ideologically driven than ever. No offense to anyone, but it's a global thing. The degrees may vary, but one cannot deny the ideological motivations. So that's where another error in reasoning comes into play that the researchers must guard against, and that is ego-based commitments. What I mean by that is we get offended when we realize, or someone points it out to us, that we do not know everything, or that we may be wrong. We find it easy to challenge and question everyone in their beliefs and attitudes, but find it difficult to accept that I may be wrong. So when media willingly or unwittingly becomes a vehicle of misinformation or conspiracy theories, it needs to pause and correct its course. The question is, are we addressing it enough in our curriculum, including analyzing journal articles, books, book chapters, news articles that may contain incorrect information? This has to be part of the research going forward. Along with a ton of misinformation, these errors in reasoning also result in conspiracy theories. And despite the evidence and facts, conspiracy theories remain alive, be it the Judge Loya case in India or Seth Rich case in US. We tend to think that conspiracy theories float in social media, but these two, among many others, to be honest, have found ample space in the mainstream news media as well. In the US, we also had something called Pizzagate conspiracy theory that floated the idea that the officials of Democratic Party were involved in running a human trafficking and child sex ring from some pizza store in Washington, DC. It seems too crazy, too far-fetched, but a man from North Carolina actually traveled to Washington, DC and fired a rifle inside the pizza store. The owners and staff also received death threats. So if media is giving ear to such items or taking every opinion as legitimate opinion and mainstreaming it, going forward, we need to put far greater emphasis on research on media ethics. Not just the philosophical principles, but also how to apply those ethics, those principles to our immediate and current environment. Next slide, please. That is, research needs to be rooted in local. To explain that, just to digress for a moment, in May this year, I was invited for a webinar on police wellness in India by Punjab University, at Punjab University in Chandigarh. And I'm working on a paper on the same topic. However, it's been a struggle to find Indian voices telling Indian stories about Indian settings, Indian problems, or sharing Indian data. That is, the majority of good research articles about Indian policing, particularly stress, refer to the literature review from studies in Western countries. Yes, we can learn from everywhere, and we should, but we cannot transplant ideas as is. One needs to understand local compulsions, resources, cultures, and histories. For starters, for example, policing as a career is very different in the US as compared to India. So the stress levels, access to resources, social stigma would be very different, and we need to hear from cops in this part of the world. To give you another example, one of my favorite theories in criminology is routine activities theory. I think the first time I read it was when I was doing my master's at Punjab University in Chandigarh, but that was about it. I read the principles, I read the studies conducted in the West, and all right, move on. However, how useful is it to understand those concepts, those theoretical ideas, and see how they help explain crime or prevent crime in Chicago or New York, but you have no clue how to apply those ideas or test those ideas in Delhi or Bombay, Mumbai. So when I teach courses in research methods, ethics, criminology, etc., I don't ask students to do a literature review using predominantly foreign sources. I ask them to use studies about US, and that to the ones about Connecticut, because that's where I teach. That's where most of my students go and work and find jobs, or go for even more research engagement. They've got to anchor theoretical concepts and ideas in their immediate environment to see their utility. This is where professors supervising research need to take lead. That is why the research must be, at least in part, aimed at understanding problems around us and offer possible solutions through policy making. But if we understand, even about media, if we understand the issues in an American or foreign context only, and then try to find solutions in India, it's going to be a struggle. I remember just before, a day before the convicts in the Nirbhaya case were hanged, I wrote a short piece for one of the portals here in India, because it was really strange to see a lot of discussions about death penalty, and every third person, including lawyers, talking about how they read some study in the US and this is what it says. And I was curious, okay, which is the study, who conducted it, when was it conducted, where was it conducted in the US, because Idaho is very different from New York, California is very different from Montana. So all these things matter. So to present these general ideas without having a local context doesn't really serve the full purpose. The researchers must work with local agencies, organizations, and people to make their research relevant. Otherwise, it's like talking in a vacuum or learning only about the theory. Of course, it's critical to learn the theory. That's the first step. But unless we test those theoretical ideas around us, we cannot really make full use of that knowledge base. Next slide, please. Thank you. Media shapes perceptions in more ways than we can imagine. You may have heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. That indicates that the crime stories lead all media spaces, crime cells, basically. The more gory the details, the more sadistic the violence, the more graphic the description, the better it sells. Forget the paparazzi or even satires. Many actual news channels in India create visuals about criminals and victims that range from embarrassing to outrageous. When we conduct research, we need to remember that these media portrayals of crime reflect the social construction of crime, and it creates meta-narratives around crime. Meta-narratives around crime, class, religion, race, etc. Now, if you notice, news media communicates primarily about violent crimes rather than white-collar or economic crimes. Similarly, when we look at the research on media and crime, we see an almost exclusive focus on how media reports about violent crime, how that reporting impacts public perception of police, the judiciary, victims, etc. Even when we talk about victim empowerment, we talk about victims of violent crimes. We do not have many people doing research on how media reports on white-collar crimes or why it does not report on white-collar crimes as aggressively. Media also tends to associate sensationalism with violence. While often there's little outrage about white-collar and economic crimes. I remember watching a particular news coverage in India about two politicians, among many, accused of corruption and going to appear in the Delhi High Court. And as they are leaders of a major political party, they practically took out a procession with them going to appear in the court. The media covered the news of the big procession rather than discussing the charges of corruption. In fact, just yesterday, I watched the trailer of a new Netflix series on bad boy billionaires India. And though I do not know how the series would be, but the trailer is fascinating. I mean, it looks exciting. I'm definitely going to watch it. It reminds me of the film, The Wolf of Wall Street. Amazing film. I loved it. It was about a white-collar criminal, however, and you almost end up cheering for him. I mean, you would not and should not cheer for a violent offender or a rapist. So why white-collar criminals? Well, it's because of the lack of focus in research about their criminality. Instead, the focus is more on their opulent lifestyle. When I started teaching, that was a lifetime ago, we used to have textbooks that called white-collar crimes, victimless crimes. They're not. Yet there is a real shortage of research on media and white-collar crimes in India. Hopefully that's a gap that we, our students, can begin to fill in near future. Those who are teaching undergraduate courses would hopefully have a list of research articles, or even graduate courses for that matter, would have a list of research articles that focus on these aspects of underreporting and non-reporting, particularly focusing on class dimensions, so that at least some of the students who are going into media and covering crime stories or conducting research in this field start covering the topic of white-collar crimes and its media representations. Not doing research on white-collar crimes, and by not covering it enough in the news, unwittingly, the media paints the poor as criminals while ignoring the same infractions in upper class. Next slide, please. Thank you. Repeat images or over-representation of one or the other group in news about crime as well as research about crime, begins to shape perceptions about the whole group or class of people. For instance, have you ever paid a bribe? Don't answer that, but just think about it. But in many ways, people who can pay bribes and get ahead or get their work done or get out of trouble kind of normalize it. And they do not see it as a crime. And thus they do not report it. But when someone robs them, steals their wallet or phone or snatches a chain, they immediately report it as a crime. The crime data then correctly reflects one set of reported crimes and criminals, but it's an incomplete picture. In visual criminology, we have a concept called cognitive maps. That is, the people begin to see their groups as how media portrays them. It begins to also shape people's behavior within their groups, and collectively images of typical offenders are created and shared in media and media studies. We have similar issues in the US about mass shootings, where media tends to medicalize criminality. That is, many mass shootings are often explained with reference to mental health or an anomaly. Next slide, please. Thank you. I hope you like my emojis. Framing of the narrative and labeling of offenders in media studies or research impacts not just the self and social perception, but also the criminal justice response. That is, crimes that are explained in cultural normal sense, they receive harsher punishment as crime is seen as intentional. On the other hand, crimes explained in medical view result in rehabilitation, lack of death penalty, or limited prison term, as the crime is seen as an exception, as I said, as an anomaly, and the treatment or medical model is used to explain it. I'm sure that you've heard the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's what media is tapping into, using a lot of images these days, has always used it, but today it's like never before. Come to think of it, I'm amazed at how much we communicate using emojis these days. I better not see any crying emojis in the chat session though, okay? Media uses images of women, children, and even animals and cartoons to get attention and reaction. These are all visual means of communication. But as researchers, we need to identify the context. It is important to remember that many people looking at the same image or video may interpret it differently. That's where it's important to understand the context as well as explore subjective experiences that impact interpretations. The way an image is presented could also create bias of interpretation. Images, after all, are presenting or showcasing a certain point of view. You must have noticed that during all kinds of protests in India, US, and elsewhere, images could be used as a narrative documentary that's pre-scripted, filmed with actors, staged, rewritten, managed to put across a specific point of view. Images could also reflect a phenomenology, that is the science of experience. That is, one could be mistaken about the interpretation of something, but not about how they experience it. That is, one cannot be forced to feel safe or unsafe, trust or not trust the police, media, or anyone else. Their experience is different and it's real for them. But that also means that it may or may not be logical, and it's not the same experience for everyone else in the same setting. In other words, feelings matter when we are trying to understand perceptions, but they vary across individuals and groups. So when media studies focus on one or the other perception and experience only, or they create a hierarchy of victims, that is, whose victimization matters and whose doesn't, they are limiting their own scope of research. When the research space is narrowed down, you'll run into roadblocks where some topics, as the previous presenters have mentioned, where some topics will be published easily and some won't. For some topics, you'll be able to get a lot of funding, and for some you won't. So in that sense, I'll tell you what I tell my students and my co-researchers and scholars. We often have these discussions. Be brave. Be brave to study not just what is common and about which you have a ton of articles available and what's convenient to find, but also what is largely ignored or overlooked for whatever reasons. Next slide, please. Thank you. At times, there has to be a face to the story for it to make an emotional connection and cause a reaction. For example, the humanitarian crisis in Syria was in the news for a long time, but a lot more people paid attention to it after the heartbreaking image of a 3-year-old kid, Aylan, was shared across mainstream and social media. I didn't include it here because it's a very heartbreaking image, but I think most of you may be familiar with it. He was found dead on a beach in Greece. It had an effective impact and caused a reaction for people to do something. Sometimes when the crisis is large scale, there's a risk of the issue being ignored as too big, too chaotic. People just don't know where to start. So they just kind of, become indifferent or ignore it. But images like that of Aylan give a face to the crisis, makes the tragedy real and not just a statistic. Of course, however, images can be manipulated and are manipulated. Not always with bad intention though. Images can be cropped, edited, reshaped, and recolored to frame dialogue in one or the other manner. However, sometimes in order to get the point across, people may also frame images where it reflects incomplete information. The image I have on this slide is that of a 4-year-old boy alone crossing the desert from Syria to Jordan and was shared by the UN staff. Next slide, please. But it's clear that the image was cropped. The actual image is on this screen. And as you can see, the boy was part of a larger group of refugees. It doesn't diminish the seriousness of the crisis, but such tactics are unnecessary and may create distrust and cynicism and deviate attention from the humanitarian crisis. Given how much crime-related news is consumed by means of images across social and news media, it would be useful to study the framing of victims, crime, criminality in India. Even during the recent inter-religious riots in Delhi, different media outlets in India and abroad undertook preferred narratives and ran with it while committing certain errors. Next slide, please. Thank you. Along with incomplete picture, we also deal with false images as well as subjective interpretations. We look at an image and build a whole story around it. Many such images are printed on posters, t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. We assign positive and negative values to the subject posing in the image. This construction of meaning leads to the normative argument. That is, we make a judgment about the person or the situation or both. Journalists and researchers use these images and normative arguments to present a certain point of view. Many times it is difficult to find a complete framework within which the initial image was placed. As all social space today, not just the cyber world, the social space is saturated with such images. Cell phones with cameras mean that almost everyone can create or contribute to the social narrative. Therefore, it is important for researchers in media studies to be trained in visual fieldwork and recognize the importance of orientation phase. That is, prepare the researchers for the unanticipated events. You know, just as the Murphy's Law, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And I have myself run into some of these hurdles while doing field work. That's why I never collect data using just one instrument. If I'm using a video recorder, I also would have a digital audio recorder just in case one or the other gets corrupted. So you have to remember that taking a picture or making a video is not research. One has to be trained in the research concepts to logically place and explain those pictures, photo essays, or videos with reference to the discipline that it applies to. Concerned criminology has been highlighting wide-ranging topics, including selective coverage of socially constructed crises. Constructed here doesn't mean fake, but how the crisis is presented to the audience. And thus many Twitter trends can be manufactured along ideological lines and present a more serious or less serious narrative based on the intention behind it. While doing research, one must avoid own bias and cynicism, guard against the voyeurism of crime imagery, must not limit their understanding only to the violent or offensive image, respect victims, respect victims' families, learn the difference between accused and a convict, suspect and an accused, and must also be concerned about the larger impact of that moment that's captured. One must be mindful of aesthetics, ethics, justice nexus. It overlaps. And not just see the violence, but also the people and humanize the harm. As professors and researchers, increasingly we use visual imagery in our classrooms, such as photographs, documentaries, films, TV shows, etc. I use a lot of that in my courses in comparative criminal justice systems, ethics, visual criminology, research methods, all over the place. It is fantastic to do so as students make an immediate connect. However, if the professor doesn't do the work in explaining the limitations of such sources and teaches techniques to analyze and present information, we'll have narratives framed around a single photograph that, despite good intentions, may actually create distrust, cynicism, stereotypes, and prejudice. This is a concern. As Dr. Rana said, I've been using mixed methods, so I've used quantitative and qualitative. And one of my concerns is always about sample quality and sample size. This is something we have to be very mindful in communication or media studies, because we build a whole narrative around an image, but it's just one image of one person in one moment of time. So we have to talk about problem of overgeneralizations, selective observations, and things like that. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the things that I want to point to is that I encourage many of my students in criminal justice to take courses in communication. Why? Well, because if they are going to be part of a police department, that a lot of our students do, one of the most crucial areas is that of communication, public trust, and perception. I'm sure you've been following some of what's going on in the US through news and social media. That communication may be at an ice cream social, at a local community hall, or through Twitter and Facebook, or both or more. So as media has become a vehicle for every discussion, increasingly the focus needs to be on using interdisciplinary approach to media studies and research. Stay true to the discipline, that is, have a thorough grounding in theory, know the critical concepts and analyze them, test hypotheses, draw generalizations, identify evolving thoughts, develop grounded theories, and so on. However, perhaps there needs to be more specialization within each discipline, and that can be gained by using interdisciplinary approach. That is, if someone in media studies is planning to conduct research about crime and media, then one would benefit from doing some coursework in the field of criminology as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. In conclusion, I must add here, I know we've beaten down on media quite a bit. Media, including social media, as you know, is a very powerful tool. In many places around the world, it gives people a voice, a connection, an opportunity, and access. Even during this pandemic, we have a shared sense of community, including right here and right now, due to media in its various forms. So none of the issues that I have highlighted should take away from the usefulness and power of media and media research and its various tools. But as we do in criminal justice, when we have a critical look, we often focus more on what needs to be fixed, on what needs deeper exploration. For example, if a police officer is doing his job well, that's not news, but if he falters, that's what we address. So just as we identify what could be better, we must also remember what all media gets right and does well. It's just that the good doesn't make the news. I'm emphasizing this so that we introspect more about this field of study and recognize that there's always more to do to truly utilize this medium to its full potential. Next slide, please. The one before that. All right, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I'll conclude with something that I tell my students and have also shared with scholars in different fields and different capacities. And that is, when we talk about these topics that affect our everyday lives, shape perceptions, and influence numerous critical narratives, we must not limit these discussions just to blogs, classrooms, seminars, symposia, or webinars. We must move beyond the episodic interest, forced attendance, or a bullet point on a resume. Higher education has never been about doing nothing. Research and scholarship are not confined to libraries and conferences. Do good research and then write social pieces on that research. Create knowledge and share your findings with a larger audience. Next slide, please. I hope this hasn't happened to you. So that's that. I truly appreciate your patience and thank you for listening. And I hope that you have some questions for me. Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Rana.
Thank you, Professor Divya, for such an interesting and enriching presentation. You raised many important points for the young media scholars while discussing the finer points of social science research. Media undoubtedly contributes immensely to shaping our perceptions, and thus we surely need to root our arguments in evidence and strictly follow the code of ethics while reporting and conducting research. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
So now we would open the floor for questions. We have received many questions for our panelists. So the first question for the panelists goes, how far are the previously existing media theories consistent with the research studies related to new media or social media platforms in the present times?
I can take it if nobody. All right, I'll be using an example from criminology. For most part, we don't need to overhaul everything or stop doing everything because suddenly we are dealing with technology. You know, for instance, in criminology, we have a bunch of theories that we use to explain different criminal behaviors, including bank robberies, right? But now we have banks being robbed online. We actually had hackers get into a bank in New Jersey and, gosh, steal millions of dollars. So we may need new understanding in investigating that crime because the technology is new, but we don't need a new theory to explain the motivation, because motivation is still the same: opportunity and access, right? So for some issues, you can use new ideas, develop new ideas, and should do that. But I think to really test whether these theories apply or explain some of the behaviors today or not, or some of the technology today or not, you really have to test those ideas locally, right? One of the, again, when we talk about bullying, that's a common global problem. We didn't need to have a new theory to explain why somebody would engage in bullying another student, fellow student, or a friend, but we had to find or address the issue that now a lot of that bullying is happening in cyberspace. So it may affect the policy aspect, right? So from the media, new media perspective, it may, we may need to look at the regulation, or we may need to address the issue of false information, or what we joke about WhatsApp University, right? So we need to address those issues, but it doesn't necessarily mean that none of the previously existing theories can you know, are invalid or cannot be used. That's my short take on it.
I'll like to add something to what Dr. Sharma has already said. I agree with her completely. And, you know, while I was giving my presentation, that was actually the whole point. And I thought I was probably addressing this question to begin with. Are the existing theories relevant? Yes, they are very relevant. But then we have to see the application. For example, I just, you know, the whole presentation, my whole presentation was to, you know, demonstrate how an existing theory can be abused. It has its strengths. It's not like UG or uses and gratifications theory, which has been like a staple theory in communication studies and research, is now out of fashion or irrelevant. No, it is not. It is very relevant. But then when we are looking at social media, can we look at it from another lens? Because it has been done to death through the perspective or through the lens of use and gratifications. But then if we have other sociological theories, and mind you, all these theories that I've talked about, none of them is new. They have been in existence since the 1950s, 60s, 70s, right? But then they find a new application suddenly, and you know, they call for a bigger application in the current context of social media, and that is why we have to look at them, and not necessarily that all theories, because if you look at the development of theories, none of the theories have developed on their own. They all have their roots in some or the other theory in the past, and you know, there have been bits and pieces of development. Everybody likes to call it their own theory, and you know, somehow, you know, everything otherwise, you know, it's just a joke, not to take it to be taken literally. But then somehow everything can be traced back to Aristotle and Plato, you know. So, and in our context, probably we can trace everything back to Mahabharata and Ramayana, which again is not irrelevant, because people have been addressing these things for ages. It's just that how smartly, how you know, astutely we apply what we know, and how much we read so that we can apply. Thank you.
Can I just come in here? I kind of have a difference of opinion here, and not significantly, but I think that every concept and every theory is, what are theories? Theories are used to explain phenomena. And as phenomena evolve, as things change, you know, media in particular as a domain today has so much to do with the way technology is developing, right? Like TikTok is dead now. There is just dead because of political reasons. But the point is that consumption of very, very short content which is of very short duration, is a newfound sort of an audience gratification that has been discovered. Like, who knew that India would have 500-600 million users of TikTok in a year's time, and today something like Reels on Instagram is replacing it. And there has been a theory of functional displacement, which kind of existed when newspapers and radios existed. And today when we talk about technology, functional displacement has its role, but you use the theory to explain phenomena which is totally different. So yeah, theories don't die, but theories evolve. You know, Vikas spoke about uses and gratification. I really think that uses and gratification has, as a concept, is so important to know, to be able to question it and now look at the concept of audience in a different way. Now it looked as at the audience from a very, very utilitarian perspective. It looked as like, why do I use media? I use media to perform certain functions. The media has certain functions for me. That is what it was based on. What was the basic criticism against users gratification was that it is very individualistic. It does not look at media. It does not look at audience as a very active participant and all of that. All of that is right. But today when we consume content in a very individual way on our smartphones, on our laptops, on our tablets, where the entire function of what we are consuming is so individualistic in nature, a certain invocation of uses and gratification is extremely important to understand that how, as an individual member of the audience, have I evolved in meaning making kind of sense with the content. So what I'm trying to say here is that theories have a shelf life, right? But we need to know what existed before it, because a new theory emerges from an older concept. A new theory is a criticism of an older theory. So that's how kind of it evolves. So it's important to just know them, but you don't have to adopt them. I mean, you can totally look at a lot of new concepts, like who knew that Marshall McLuhan, who was dead in the 1990s, possibly for a lot of people, would have a rebirth in the kind of times we are living. While we have a lot of problems with what he said burn all the books, and but what he meant to say is that one day you will all be on the digital mode. Look at the world we have come to inhabit. Marshall McLuhan cannot be truer in what he proposed than how it looks today. It's such a media deterministic world. If you don't have access to the internet, you don't have access to so much around you right now in the kind of world we have been forced to live in. So what I'm trying to say is that theories do have a shelf life, but before you adapt to a new concept, do figure out that where did it evolve from. And theories definitely die, but then they are reborn with a new dimension. That's what I would say. And I don't think that everything in India evolved from Ramayana and Mahabharata.
I would like go back to what I was saying, because you started off with saying that you have a different take, because I don't see a different take in what you have said.
So my different take was that everything doesn't evolve from Ramayana and Mahabharata.
No, it obviously, because theories, they have this shelf life. UG has been used, you know, and then being discarded, it will come back again. It's not been discarded actually. So, you know, they have their shelf life. That's all, you know, was being said. And actually, the theories that I'm talking about, you know, they were not being used, right, till now for a very long time. And suddenly they have like a very, you know, useful or a very potent ground to be used. That is the social media. And then, you know, when you go back and look into what are the theories or exclusive theories available for analysis of social media, for example, like the media has evolved and the context has evolved. So, you know, one would go back to, let's say, the information processing theories. But the information processing theories, if you look at them, they have been evolving or in the process of evolution, you know, even before we had internet in our country. People have been talking about information processing theories from the 1960s and 70s. So, you know, it's like the application in a newer context. That is what, you know, my point was. But yeah, your point is well taken.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Professor Divya. How important is human rights research in reference to current media trends? And what are the methods that make research in the sector meaningful?
Wow, that's a different presentation, a whole presentation in itself. Thank you for that question. I think human rights are as important as breathing. As long as you're breathing, you have to think of the human rights. You have to address it in all forums. My concern, and I think I just in half a sentence mentioned it in my presentation, increasingly when I look at media behavior, particularly about topics of crime and justice, the way it treats victims in particular, Not that it follows anything in terms of or maintains dignity of the suspect either, but it is particularly brutal to the way it covers victims' rights. I think this is where we need to focus on not just that these are the basic rights that exist on the paper and you memorize them and you have a question and you check off the mark, or you have 40-page literature review that refers to all the articles about human rights. But you really have to take your media space and hold it accountable. Write papers about something that's happening in your media space here and now. There's just no way around human rights. You have to do the work, you have to put in the effort. In terms of research, I think this is where we would benefit a lot more perhaps from the qualitative ideas, individual narratives, because let's say you're trying to interview a victim of brutal violence, his or her experience or trauma may be very different from the person right next to him, right? So unless and until you are trained in language, sensitivity, access to the setting, exiting the setting, your behavior in the setting, you would struggle to A, elicit data, and B, you may actually cause more harm. That is, you may be studying human rights, but you may actually cause more harm, because when people are sitting and sharing all their experiences with you, traumatic experiences with you, they're reliving that trauma. I felt this during my research in Jodhpur, western part of India, where I interviewed refugees from Pakistan who are seeking shelter in India. And I heard horrific stories, and some of the individual, like one-on-one interviews would go on for a pretty long time. They were intensive interviews. And so yes, you can study about these topics, but if you're not trained as a student or a scholar in the field of media studies, if you're just trained in technology, that is how to use the camera, or you're trained in the tools, in the medium, that is where all you can share those interviews and those findings, I think that's half a job done. You really have to be trained in the discipline of human rights. You have to be trained in the discipline of criminology. That is where, you know, one of the things we have, I'm not very familiar with the course structure here, but we always have students taking about 15 credits, or I think 24 credits in many cases, of free electives, and we encourage them to take courses in sociology, psychology, communication, social work, and things like that, so that they have a deeper understanding instead of just picking up a camera and conducting the interview, which unfortunately I see happening a lot in media space.
Thank you very much, Professor Divya. The next question is for Professor Vikas. Ritika Saxena, the participant, she asks, social media has become a major area of research, but when it comes to psychological study on them, they are not pinpointed and superficial. What are your suggestions, sir?
Again, my suggestion is what was there in my presentation. Any media, any medium, in fact, as Ruchi ma'am also elaborated in her research, has so many, intertextualities, so many areas which, have a bearing on communication in our, exercise of communication, that these cannot be studied in isolation. So obviously, we have to look at some theoretical support from the specific areas. In this case, support from psychology. And why? Because we don't have psychological theories. We have adapted psychological theories for explanation of media concepts, for explanation of media behavior, audience behavior, in fact, even, the source behavior. Now, unless we go back to the psychological studies, and that becomes a more challenging task for a media scholar, because in our media schools, we are not talking about all these areas or all those basic theories in psychology or in sociology, or in fact even in literary criticism, which I, on a lot of fora and on a lot of research projects, I find that if our scholars have that grounding, they can probably then, for a specific problem, build on that. They need not be, let's say, have the same level of knowledge of these fields as like a master student, but then some grounding into these areas, because they will ultimately inform our research, and the researcher can finally then build on that basic knowledge and probably find himself a good enough theoretical framework and then adapt it to media studies. Now, how it will be done, it'll be a long process. I'd just given an example of UG, how from social learning theory and from how it was a psychological theory of Maslow's, those were integrated into media studies, and now UG is a field of its own, right? So it'll be a long process, but then it has to be started somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dogra. Professor Ruchi, Saima, one of the participants, she wants to know your opinion on pseudo-realism on social media.
Like in general, or like from an academic point of view? I didn't understand the question. Because one, I think it's an oxymoron, like to say pseudo-realism. But on the other hand, I can just speak about it from the point of view of investigating, so to say, these alternative identities that we create for ourselves, or so many people create on the social media, which is not the real us. Maybe it's an aspirational us or an aspirational image of us that we create on the social media. But I think just now Dr. Vikas Dogra was speaking about, I think somebody asked him some question, and he was responding particularly from the point of view of psychological theories and media studies. I don't know what the participant is actually asking, because if the person is asking something about how to research a subject like this, then of course you also have to position this question in a disciplinary context. And if your context is psychological in nature, that people create certain alternative identities for themselves on their social media, or their social media identity is different from who they are, which may be either aspirational or a need for some sort of social validation, then that's something that will require a very sensitive approach to researching a phenomenon like this. However, if the question is about what is my opinion on it, well, I don't want to judge somebody for who they are on the social media. I think it's a pretty empowering space for people to express themselves the way they want to. And who am I to judge? Because I think pseudo-realism, I don't know what that is, but I think there is a pseudo dimension to every individual, which they create for themselves, right, in any context, whether that is the physical context or the virtual context. But I think there are so many ways to research the social media. There's a psychological way, there is a sociological aspect to it, and the question in itself, I'm not being able to understand that where should I position this question to respond to it in a particular context. So that's my take on it for the time being.
Thank you very much.
I think if this particular person is looking to start a research, vis-a-vis social media and pseudo-realism, one good starting point could be probably social information processing theory, or the concept of impression management. That could be a starting point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another participant is requesting the panel if they could throw some light on sentiment analysis and conversation analysis.
Well, my take is that probably it's too large a topic to just throw a light, and one would need probably a few classes for that.
I don't know. I myself haven't done sentiment analysis, but for conversational analysis, my reference would be this sage book by David Silverman, which you may want to refer to. And like Dr. Vikas said, it's a huge topic. One cannot answer, give a few lines of a response to this question. But I think one of the best texts to refer to is David Silverman's book on qualitative research. It has a huge chapter on conversational analysis, explained in a really how to do it kind of a way. So that may be a great reference to go to.
Thank you.
Professor Singh, you can come anytime you want.
No, I just wanted to add a point here. There's a whole field of pragmatics. Brown and Levinson, conversational analysis. You have a huge amount of work that is done. There is the International Pragmatics Association, which comes up with a journal called Journal of Pragmatics. And if you look at the issue after issue, it is very well edited, and it has very high standards of work on conversational analysis, particularly things like media trials or other real trials, right from Nixon's Watergate scandal to various other kinds of issues, how to really fudge and how people actually prevaricate and how people create their media images. In this conversational analysis, this is what is studied. So therefore, there's a lot of work in this area, but you need to work in the area of, applied linguistics to get into this area, particularly social linguistics to get into this area. I just have one comment on the excellent presentation, which was our last presentation. There's very interesting connection between one area of linguistics and the police, wellness, and media area, particularly the forensic linguistics. There's a whole lot of work which is done in forensic linguistics, and in India, we do not have many places for that kind of stable work. Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore, is one good place where the high courts and law courts quite often, refer to in the area of while checking whether a particular police officer has indeed, who has been accused of taking a bribe, it is his voice, or the voice has been doctored by some technician in the media who's very good in media. So this is also another area which is a lot of connectivity. Thank you for.
If I could just add one thing, Dr. Singh, quickly on that. I appreciate your comments about that, you picked correctly on that. I think when we talk about particularly police behavior, there's a whole field of study about how media represents police officers. They are either all corrupt and inhuman and brutal, or they are superhumans and superheroes. You don't really have, and this is across entertainment media as well as news media. You don't really ever see police officers being humanized in a way. And this is a problem we face in the US, but I think it's a more serious issue here in India. And I think that affects stress levels. That affects public perception. For instance, think of it like this: if somebody is day in, day out, whether it's media or public, constantly yelling at you, telling you, the choicest abuses, how are you gonna be ethical about your behavior? Standing in the middle of the road, managing traffic, and nobody's following rules, and just feeling entitled. And if you stop them and try to issue a traffic ticket or challan, then they offer you money, bribe. That's insulting, right? That you can sell your professional ethics for 100 or 50 rupees. So I think there's a whole field that we look into in relation to policing and media. We have increasingly police officers being trained to communicate via Twitter. During the Boston bombings, for instance, the Boston Police Department aggressively and very effectively shut down a lot of rumors through a Twitter account, while we were just still looking for the suspects. Then there's the whole field of linguistic violence, and we use sentiment analysis, exploring that field a lot further in terms of studying perceptions as well as expression of those perceptions. in terms of how language is created, particularly violent language is created. It then goes into the whole field of rap music and things like that, just the daily abuses. So that's a whole lot of other field. But thank you.
No, I just wanted to add here, the perception point that you have mentioned is very crucial. And if you look at Hercule Poirot and you look at Sherlock Holmes, just compare them with Byomkesh Bakshi, one who is a dhoti clad, kurta pehna hua, and the person who goes very well educated, absolutely aware of things and giving you references all at the drop of a hat. There's a big difference. A lot of interesting experiments have been done by our creative writers to humanize many of those people who are otherwise thought to be superheroes, like detectives and all that. I don't know. We have an aura associated with Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. To break that, Indian detective story writers and then the filmmakers who made films on them have excellent experiments on humanizing the criminal investigations of this kind. So this is very interesting work. And here you have Satyajit Ray coming in with the Feluda series, and also some others coming in with the Byomkesh Bakshi series. So very interesting experiments have been done by media as well.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Divya. Happy to take another question from Colonel Dargan. Welcome, sir. He says, in today's era of extensive specialization, researchers tend to know little about other approaches than that of their own expertise. What, according to you, are the empirical realities of media research today? What kind of media and communication research are carried out in each specific country, and who is doing the research, and in which direction is research headed in the future? Professor Ruchi, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah.
I mean, I want to just say hello to Colonel Dargan first. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to have worked under his mentorship. And now I don't know if I'll be able to kind of totally take the question from all the dimensions. It's a huge question. But I really think that it's important. And right now, I think Indian universities in particular have become very self-conscious of subscribing and creating access to a lot of academic journals and readings and databases, which was not accessible to a lot of professors, teachers in higher education till a few years ago. I think this is because of course, the newfound orientation towards asking faculty to participate in academic and research activities. But I think it's one thing is that we as people who are teachers, for the first few years of our career, never thought that we should read research papers and journals to upgrade our understanding of our subject. I think that was not something that we were trained as people with. And I think a lot of fields today have a lot of journals which we can read, and we can actually understand what is the kind of research happening in different areas. I think that's one way of understanding what are the new areas of research, from which countries are the researchers coming. And I think some very good departments, both within India and outside India, communication departments in particular, that's what I'm referring to, have very clear-cut research agendas. So for example, there are some very good departments in Indian universities where good PhD scholars and good communication researchers are happening. And we know that there is a group of people who work in a particular, so for example, one example I can give is, say for example, in the University of Hyderabad in particular in India, the Department of Communication also has the UNESCO chair on community media. So a lot of people who want to work especially in community media, whether it's community radio or any other form of community media, apply for their PhD program specifically to that department, because they know that there is a lot of resource available and expertise available. And I think, so I lead the PhD program at Symbiosis, and we are really working on driving a certain research focus, a research agenda for the department here, where we over a period of time will develop an expertise in particular area of media communication research, and people can identify us and come and do that kind of work here. I mean, I don't want to straitjacket ourselves to only doing that kind of work, but that is the kind of dimension. Say for example, a friend of mine who did his PhD at Northwestern UK was very keen on working in that particular department, because that particular department is where Webster has worked, and they are like the leaders in audience research. So he really wanted to work on audiences, and then he went there. And one other way I learned over the last few years about identifying good researchers in a particular field also is to really figure out bibliographies and seminal readings in particular areas of work. Because when you read bibliographies, and especially seminal work in particular fields, you also know who are the scholars who have shaped that field, and then who were their students who took on from there and did like researches after that. Then in specific countries, say for example, nothing to boast here, but say for example, in the last few years, I'm one of the few people who did some work in the area of media and children in India, where largely people haven't been interested. And I don't have very smart skills to network with people, right? But I can just tell you that my little work in children, media, and gender got me people from Europe as well as North America writing to me, wanting to collaborate with me, because when they would search for things on Google Scholar or ResearchGate or academia, they would always find my name there. And I haven't got a lot of citations for my work or anything. I'm just saying that these are organic ways of doing your work and figuring out who are the people available. Right now, I was just reached out by a professor from a university in Germany who got a grant to work on studying how are children feeling in the time of lockdown globally. And she just wrote to me because she saw my work from India on media and children, and she said if I would be interested in collaborating with this work. Our research paper is already out. I actually got to debut on German television because of it, right? And right now we are working on a book chapter, and our study is called Media, Children and COVID-19. And I collected data from about 75 children from India, which was a detailed questionnaire that they had to respond to. And I think these are the ways that we develop our understanding of who's working in what fields, because unlike, say, for example, somebody who's done their PhD in the US, like Divya amongst us right now, they are trained in their PhD programs in a certain way. And I think Indian universities, I think with people like Vikas, Manish, who I know, and with their intention to work with younger scholars and communities, I think as part of that generation, we totally are oriented to developing that sort of cultures in our departments now. But that's not the culture we were trained in. And I think that's something that's going to change the way a lot of research and academic scholarship in India will increase. And like right now, we find a lot of scholars from outside India who work in a particular space and then find out what our way with them is. I think slowly that is the kind of culture in India that will come from, because I really see very, very fantastic PhD work happening in Indian departments right now, which was not India's reality even 5 years ago. And I think people like us have to take social and moral responsibility, and somebody like Colonel Dargan should actually mentor all of us in that, because he's been in this field for a really long time. You know, where we all have to come together and create this community where scholars feel empowered, where the journey of a PhD guide and a research scholar is a journey of collaboration. And I think that's something, and my PhD guide was that kind of a person for me. She was like a collaborator who taught me how you could make your own scholar so empowered. And I think that's the way to go ahead if we want to see what kind of, because in India there is still no culture of people coming together and creating research agendas for department to find out who's working where. And I think all of us have to come together, you know, to do that. And Manish had this he has this nice Facebook page called Association of Media and Communication Educators. And once in a while, he keeps asking all of us that what do we want to come in for? And I think right now we all have more organic ideas, and our generation can certainly make certain headway with communication research in India, in my opinion. I don't know if I answered Colonel Dargan's question in particular, but I think the way we have been approaching the work of Western scholars to find out who works in what field, who are the collaborators, who are the researchers, authors, people, and we learn from them. Now is the time to create similar kind of community and collaboration and research work in our own departments and in our country. And I think the COVID times have been such great teachers in that sense, because if this is the way we could have come together now, why did we not do it a year ago or 2 years ago? And I think this is always possible, and I think there's some way ahead now. Yeah.
Just a quick correction. I never finished my PhD, the second PhD at Temple University. I have one from India, but I got another master's there, Ruchi, but thank you. So yeah, it's ABD.
There's another question from Colonel Dagan for Dr. Divya. Media's job is to report crime, but these days all we see is that they are doing media trials. What is your take?
I think.
Hi, Colonel Dargan. Thank you for that wonderful question.
Divya, can I just add the context of this question?
Sure.
Yeah. So what is happening right now with the SSR case? So that is the context of the current question. There were other questions, similar questions in the chat box as well.
I think you've rightly picked on the fact that media no longer just reports about the issues. And I think it may be because we have 24/7 news channels. It's a business. It's not just about reporting. It's like generating revenue, getting the eyeballs. I think that plays in the hands of sort of changing the approach. That is, instead of just reporting based on principles, objectives, and ethics, we actually have opinion makers. You know, we have analysts. Sometimes I'll be honest with you, I don't watch a lot of news in India, simply because I can't follow what exactly is going on. There's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of screaming, and in some cases, the host is essentially trying to just get people to say what he or she wants to hear. But if you watch it for long enough, you can even predict which guest panelists would say what. And even the vocabulary is rather limited. You can play bingo watching news. But going back to the SSR, I think from the coverage that I have seen, to put it mildly, it's embarrassing. And I don't know if it's only about getting the eyeballs. I think there's the political discussion around it. But just looking at it from the perspective of mental wellness, I think somehow, whether it's the public or the media, you know, because it's the same people or the sensibilities are not too different, people are more comfortable, if I may use that word, in accepting that somebody was murdered rather than accepting that somebody took his own life. I think suicide carries, or mental illness carries, a lot of stigma in India, and I don't know if the circus that we have around the SSR case is partly driven by that, because whether you look at the social media or you look at the news media, the mainstream media, barring maybe a couple of channels, at least the ones I have seen, there's almost a push, like great push with a conviction that it was a murder, and let's see if we can force fit the investigation in that direction. I think it's embarrassing. I think it's unprofessional. I think it's unethical. And this is where perhaps the groups, agencies, organization, whatever you have that supervises media reporting needs to pull up some of these, not just journalists, but like the whole channels, one after the other. You know, one of the quick points that I would make is I was looking at the data of police suicide in India, and it's incredible. It's incredible how many suicides are reported as accidental deaths. After the investigation, they're concluded as accidental deaths, that somebody OD'd or somebody, you know, fired the weapon by mistake or something. And that to me reflects the larger sentiment that the people in general are uncomfortable in processing that somebody who is rich and famous, has everything under the sun, why would he be unhappy, or why would he be so cornered that he can't reach his family or friends or seek help? I think that stigma around mental illness directs some of the way this media trial is going on. I'm not aware of the political aspects, though I've heard about the elections and stuff like that that people are throwing in. But to be honest, Colonel Dargan, this is not something that we are seeing for the first time, right? I remember a similar circus around that Ruchi Talwar case, right? Whenever you have these issues, it seems like people talk about it, they criticize media, we criticize media, but I am not sure, and maybe the other panelists can address this. I'm not sure what are the agencies responsible to regulate this medium in India, and what's their role? Why these circuses with clowns but are patently unfunny go on for such long time and repeatedly. So to put it simply, I think it's embarrassing, it's unethical, and somebody should hold someone accountable. It's a disrespect to the victims and the family members of the victims. It's a stress for all the names that they keep throwing up as suspects, that this person did this person did that. One of the issues is that if you had such narrative in the US, you would have a lot of defamation lawsuits. But here you don't even want to file that because you'll be stuck in the legal system forever, right? You don't have the Speedy Trial Act. So I think it's almost like people can get away with anything. That's why it continues.
Thank you very much.
I would like to come in here because I have had a little problem with Arnab Goswami and some of the others being categorized as media. Because media is a huge term. And then within that, we have a smaller segment of news media. And within that news media, we have a very, very small segment of these few, channels, television news channels. Otherwise, there's the newscape is pretty large, from the online platforms to the print, and they're like still very revered, print publications, as well as now a lot of online platforms have come up, which we all think of as professionally run organizations. These few people who are grabbing the eyeballs on the news channels, they are a different league. I don't call them news channels. I call that news-based entertainment. That's not journalism. So let us not confuse. Whatever, for some people probably, yeah. But yeah, it's not entertaining to many. But then, yeah, it's news-based entertainment. And because they get the eyeballs, so we get to talk about it. But then there's a large chunk of media which is doing a remarkable job of getting issues. For example, if somebody asks me, or there are debates on, let's say, media trial, or let's say, media जो है वो लैक्मे फैशन वीक दिखाएगा, but विदर्भ में लोग भूख से मर रहे हैं, वो नहीं दिखाएगा. So I generally ask those people, how do you know कि विदर्भ में लोग भूख से मर रहे हैं, या फिर वहां पर जो है वो सूखा पड़ा है? You get to know it from the very media, that we criticize. Not the very media, as in not the, these news channels, but then there are others who are reporting about it. So it's, to a large extent, it is also up to us what we are choosing. This is like I'm trying to be very precise, very short here. It's a, long thing. But then coming to media trials specifically, yes, it is a nuisance. But at the same time, if we all go back a little further in history and, remember the Manu Sharma case. Right, Manu Sharma got scot-free, and then there was a media trial, front page stories on in Times of India and in Indian Express. They didn't relent. It was a trial by media before the case was again taken up, and this person found justice. Right, so it's a sword which cuts both ways. If we give enough TRPs to people like, those people who are conducting these debates, and, they're interested in conducting these debates, think of 1 hour news program. Think of the economics. 1 hour news program means that, you have 4 panelists and your 1 hour news program gets produced for free. You have no costs at all. Think of 1 hour news program as in a news bulletin. For 1 hour, if you take out those 10 minutes of advertising and, the montage and, the breaks and, all those graphics that play, you take that out, you have at least 50 minutes to fill with news. Those 50 minutes means at least 50 news stories. At least. In fact, in our time, we were told that a news story should not be more than 40 seconds. But yes, okay, 50 stories, which means at least if you take 2 stories from 1 reporter, so at least 25 reporters. Which also means that you have a backup team in the office, which is, editing that, which is putting the graphics, which is doing the VO, which is putting the package together, which means more costs. And so look at the economics of these people when they're working, and that is why they give you all that trash that they give you. They have people who are there for publicity. They have people who are there for their political, affiliations of whatever duties they have to their masters. But then they are there just to give you entertainment. Thank you.
Dr. Rana, could I just add one more quick note?
Sure, sure.
I think this is where we need to go back to our curriculum and really emphasize ethics, teaching ethics, and not ethics as being part of 5 other courses, but ethics as a standalone course, and emphasize it across educational levels. I also want to just add one sentence to what Dr. Dogra said, that yes, media is useful. I think I mentioned about the Jessica Lal's case, the Manu Sharma case, or for that matter, even Nirbhaya. So these topics, yes, media does bring up repeatedly and all that, but the issue is not just what is being said, but how it is being said. So the media can still push for these investigations, have another look at the evidence, but it can do it in a more ethical and professional manner.
Thank you.
I would like to come in about ethics again. See, we are all studied, in the same department, and we have had one whole paper on ethics and laws, and we are also teaching those courses. My point is this: in a law department, a professor of law teaches the student how to go about making his case strong. What is a case history? How do you go to the references, and how do you plead in the court? Everything that they are taught. They are not taught how to take तारीख पे तारीख, तारीख पे तारीख, तारीख पे तारीख, or to use other hatkandas, जिसको हम बोलते हैं, in the court of law, which a kid learns while he's practicing with a senior lawyer or while he's watching other lawyers in the court. That is a practice. In fact, none of the departments, none of the educational institutions, have their degrees which are not without a course in ethics. It's there, but then the realities of the media. When my kid goes and starts working in a news organization, and the news organization tells him, "Oh, this is the kind of story you have to do," now he has to have a job. And in our country, sadly, taking a job and maintaining a job is the biggest challenge. And this kid would have to do what he's told most of the times. I know it's a very compromised state of affairs, and a journalist would be expected to at least stand up to his rights and his ethics while he's fighting for the society. But then at the end of the day, it all comes down to bread and butter, and this person has to maintain that. So ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, the buck stops with the media organizations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we do have these issues in the US as well. Degrees may vary, but you're right, the editorial intent does influence who gets hired, who gets fired, who gets ahead in the career. But whether it's the media personnel, or for that matter, we talk about in policing, that we need to move away from the idea that these are trades or crafts that you can only learn on the job from others who are already there. The practitioner perspective is important. People who are working in media is important. It's important to listen to them, learn from them. But remember, their experiences, our individual experiences, are limited. And that's why we need to develop and follow professional ethics, not personal ethics. We have to look at whether it's media studies or police studies or lawyers, court system, judiciary, whatever. We have to look at them as professions, not a trade or craft that you learn only out on the street.
Well, we have received a large number of questions, and my apologies to the participants. Due to paucity of time, we will not be able to take all the questions. I've tried taking most of them. I'll take the last 2 questions, and then maybe we'll close the session. This question is from one of our PhD scholars with Amity, Rana Bedi, who aspires to join academics in future once she's completed her PhD. She says she's very anxious about how shall we motivate the future generations entering the field of mass communication so that they take it as a serious professional choice. Professor Jaggi, I would request you to kindly answer this.
Sure. I think this is the time when you need to inspire every young person who wants to do mass communication to be there. What stops you? You must be a young person. You're a PhD scholar. I think you are the guys who have to stay optimistic about this domain, because if there are, and I think Vikas was just speaking about it, if there are people, I will tell you, I have not bothered to even read about the Sushant Singh Rajput case for the last 2 months. I don't care about it. Whether it's on TV or on social media, I've unfollowed every person who even posts about it, because that's not important. It's not important. Very rightly, Divya just said that there is somebody who died, right? Who took their own life, right? And look at the spectacle it's being made. And once the Bihar elections are done, nobody's going to care about it. You all know it for a fact. So when you all know it, then when we all know it, why do we get stuck in the cycle? I mean, how many? I have a batch of 35 odd journalism students who come to SIMC every year. And for the last 2 years, not to name a channel, but there have been a couple of channels, TV channels, who have been trying to tell us to give them students. They want students to join. Not a single student wanted to take a campus placement. In such a tough year also, when people were struggling to find employment, when they were all just passing out, right? They figured out employment at other places, but there were clear-cut choices for these young journalism students to join these TV channels, and they very, very vociferously said no. And I think these are these younger people who inspire us to continue running these programs, because we are the people in academia who can shape mindsets where people will go into the field and do meaningful work. So you as a young person have to stay motivated if you want to motivate more youngsters to do it. Because if you don't believe in your own field, how are you going to inspire so many other people? Because media is something that shapes discourse in a society, right? And if so many of us are calling what's happening on TV news right now as a circus, that means that we all who are from the field, the insiders, are finding something seriously wrong with it, right? Is anybody who's talking here or anybody who's asking a question even saying that all that's happening on TV is great? I think there are TV journalists. I have a colleague who heads the journalism department at my institute, who is a former TV journalist and a successful one, who actually is writing a book chapter right now as to what's wrong with TV journalism. And I think it's people from the field who will question the field and change the field. So stay inspired, because you are going to be inspiring so many young people to join it and change it for good. And everything is a phase. This was a phase in US television also, and Divya would agree with it. And then it died till Trump came back. And then there was like Fox versus CNN debate that started. So it's all a phase. If this is happening, something else is also happening and that's where we have the internet. We have young people who are questioning all of this. So don't worry about it. Get onto the field with all your motivation and make people motivated about joining this field. Yeah, this shouldn't bother you.
Thank you very much. So the last question from Dr. Ojha, who's requesting the panel, if the panel could suggest some good Indian Asian theories so that we can strengthen the locally rooted research in India.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to take this question. I don't know what are Indian or Asian theories about things, but I really think that there are certain good Indian and Asian scholars from communication whose work can be referred to if one looks at. And there is like a huge writing now in de-westernizing communication and media studies that's available. Mm-hmm. And I think a simple Google Scholar and academia search will help you find a lot of such readings. And again, Indian or Asian theories also will exist in certain contexts. So what's the context in which these Indian and Asian theories require to be communicated? I think it's important that we all start kind of posting all this stuff on some social media pages where all of us could be there, and that would be helpful. But my first suggestion is to get into de-westernizing media and communication studies kind of a research area, and look for good papers that exist across where a lot of such concepts can be responded to. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My take on this is that you don't always need theories. Probably, some concepts can also do, some established concepts and inquiry into those concepts. And within the Indian knowledge system, I would like to refer to one study that I'm aware of. It was a PhD thesis of former IIM Ahmedabad director, and it was on negotiations. And the thesis was based on an evaluation of the negotiations that go on in Mahabharata. Now, people in academic circles, people generally like sneer at the mere mention of Mahabharata or Ramayana, or taking cues from that. But then, in the context of negotiations, this person refers to the Krishna going to the darbar of Dhritarashtra and asking for starting with a portion of the Rajya and then suddenly coming down to 5 gram, right? So the negotiation failed, according to this thesis, because Krishna de-escalated his demands too early, too soon. And then, on the other hand, the same negotiator, that is Krishna, sends Kunti to negotiate with Karna. So Karna is coming out of his bath early in the morning, so he's isolated. And Kunti starts with asking him to join with the Pandavas, which is a huge ask. And Karan, having refused that, and having Krishna knowing that he's got a huge ego about his being a Danveer, is on the back foot, and he then says, "Iske alawa kuch bhi mang lo." So there, Krishna asks for his kundal and kavach. That is what he cannot refuse. So it is basically a successful negotiation. It is a case of successful negotiation. Now he's used these two examples amongst many others to use the concept of negotiation throughout Mahabharata to build his thesis and to give his recommendations on negotiations in corporate world. Similarly, for example, in literature now, Natya Shastra is being referred to very frequently, and it is suddenly taken up very strong position within the academic community. And I'm sure at least this text is something that we can apply in the field of communication, in the field of performed, on-screen presentations, or on this at least to the stage part of communication. If we look into it, we will find several beautiful theories. For example, the Upanishads. The entire concept is based on not finding the right or the final meaning. The entire text is basically based on that. If you read Gita, your interpretation is as right as it is mine. And there are people who have given huge commentaries on why you are right and I am also right. So obviously, there's a lot of scope in going back to the Indian tradition and finding concepts and theories which can inspire and motivate future researchers.
Thank you very much. And I am indeed thankful to the panel for taking up questions so patiently and answering each one of them. And my apologies to the participants whose questions I could not take up. I'm really sorry about that. So now I would like to invite Professor Manish Verma to propose the vote of thanks.
So after almost 4 hours of research discussion, we still have participants. So that speaks about the kind of interaction we've had. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ruchi, Dr. Vikas, Dr. Divya, and all of you have covered very diverse areas. And I'm sure all the participants, faculty, scholars have learned a lot from these discussions. And as everyone said, as part of this fraternity, it's our duty to collaborate and continue with our efforts in terms of organizing such discussions, such forums. So I hope this is just the start of that. And we will like to bring more people, more diverse views, and maybe, as Ruchi rightly said, maybe create specific groups, maybe somewhere. So we have a group on Facebook, but we can still create some subgroups, and where research agendas can be defined, and like international organizations are doing it. So we can learn a lot from them as well. As part of the protocol, I would like to thank our university authorities, Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, Pro Vice Chancellor, and Dean Professor Singh, who could join us and who could set a tone for the discussion in the beginning itself. And he had to leave in between, and now he's not with us now again because of other engagements. So I want to thank him as well. Thank you very much all the participants who have joined all across India, and scholars, researchers, and we will, as I said earlier, we will continue with our efforts to give platforms to young researchers and faculty members, and try to bring relevant people and people who are who can really educate us also. And because we are still evolving, I don't consider myself a very active researcher, but still I have made an effort in terms of creating platforms rather than doing much to research myself. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time, and we hope to come back and connect once again sometime soon. Thank you very much.